The bells of St. Lawdog the Martyr above the cold blue Cardiganshire Bay rang the half-hour at 10 o'clock on the warm, pale yellow Saturday morning of the 11th of September, 1819. The whitewashed 12th century Norman tower stood plain against the long horizon of the Irish Sea, its small, square crenellations softened by 6 centuries of salt wind, its single bell still echoing along the cliff. The cliff path from the village rose in soft turf to the south porch, where the late summer thrift had withered to bronze upon the verges and the harebells leaned in the warm breath of the morning. The pews of the small Welsh parish church were filled to the doors with the village of Llanforthwen, with the household of Caversham Park in Berkshire, and with 3 Sinclair carriages drawn up at the Lich Gate. At the chancel step stood the 6th Duke of Caversham, 34, in black superfine wedding tailcoat, the Caversham ducal signet on his right hand, a single sprig of white spring narcissus pinned at his lapel. Beside him stood the Reverend Price, in black cassock and white linen surplice, the small silver crucifix at his breast catching the long, pale yellow light from the south window. Up the aisle on the arm of Sir Rhys Trevethan came the bride, high-waisted ivory silk, the heirloom Sinclair, 1781, wedding veil pinned to a small coronet of white spring narcissus, the Caversham diamonds at her throat, her clear, cool sea-blue eyes very steady upon her groom. She was 24. But this is not where her story begins. Her story began 6 years, 2 months and 3 weeks earlier, on the warm, pale yellow Saturday morning of the 18th of June, 1812, at St. George's, Hanover Square, in the parish of Mayfair, London, when, at 25 to 10 o'clock, 2¼ hours before the wedding she'd believed she would be making that morning, a footman in Caversham livery handed her a single folded sheet of cream-laid paper sealed with the Caversham ducal crest and addressed in the Marquis's own hand. She broke the seal. She read it. She did not weep. She was Lady Marina Lockwood, 18 years of age, only daughter of the late 10th Earl of Lockwood, lately of Welbeck Street in the parish of Marylebone, the small, handsome house her godfather had given her in life, and she stood that morning in the small first-floor drawing-room of that small, handsome house in her wedding gown. 2¼ hours before the ceremony of which her bridegroom had now, by the 4 sentences in his own steady hand, written the close. She had her long, rich, dark chestnut wavy hair, deep, warm chestnut brown with copper lights in firelight, though no firelight reached it now in the level June daylight, pinned smooth in a low chignon at the nape, with the small wisps escaped at the temples that she could never quite tame. Her clear, cool sea-blue eyes, true cool sea-blue, the colour of the Irish Sea under cloud, with flecks of dark gold in firelight, under thick, dark lashes, held very steady. The direct gaze that her late mother had taught her was the truest courtesy of an honest woman. Her ivory fair English skin carried its faint warm rose flush across the cheekbones, with the faint freckles across the bridge of her nose that the Earl had loved and her late mother had despaired of, and the small natural beauty mark just above the left corner of her lower lip. Her oval face, delicate fine features, soft well-shaped mouth at composed, quiet, finely arched, dark honey-brown brows level, long graceful neck upright, her slender 5'5" frame perfectly upright in the high-waisted ivory silk wedding gown with its short puff sleeves, the long ivory silk gloves to the elbow drawn neatly, the heirloom Sinclair, 1781 wedding veil laid across the back of the small slipper chair beside her, ready to be pinned to a small coronet of white spring narcissus, the small spray of which lay upon the mahogany table at her right hand. Her godmother had gone down already to wait at the carriage. The maid had stepped out to the landing for the spray. She was alone in the drawing room when the footman knocked. She crossed the carpet, the silk whispering at her ankles, and took the folded sheet from his white-gloved hand. She thanked him in her soft, warm, low alto voice. He bowed and withdrew. She stood by the small leaded window where the long, pale yellow morning fell across the carpet, and she broke the Caversham seal with her thumb, and she unfolded the cream-laid paper to its full single page, and she read it through once, and then through once again, in steady silence, in the cold, flat clarity of the level June light. Welbeck Street, this morning, the 18th of June, 1812. My lady, I have been shown in the past half hour evidence of your secret engagement to Captain James Lacey of the Foot Guards, which leaves me no honourable course but to break off our own engagement of the spring. I cannot in honour proceed with the ceremony of this morning. I wish you, with such steadiness as the case admits, every happiness in your future life. I beg leave to remain, my lady, your most obedient servant. Caversham. She set the note flat upon the small mahogany table at her right hand, the writing turned face up, the 4 crisp lines lying composed beneath her steady gaze. She did not sit. She drew the wedding veil from the back of the slipper chair where it had lain folded since 6 o'clock that morning, and she laid it across the table beside the note in a long, smooth ivory drift. And she did not weep. She crossed quietly to the small writing desk by the leaded window, the desk her godfather had given her at 15, with its cream paper and its single sandcaster and its small silver inkstand. And she sat, and she dipped the pen, and in her clear, small, composed hand, she wrote one line upon the cream paper. My lord, the letter you have been shown is not mine. I have never written to Captain James Lacey of the Foot Guards, nor to any other gentleman by that name. I make no further answer. Marina Lockwood. She sanded it. She folded it once, sharp at the crease. She sealed it with a plain black wafer pressed flat with the small ivory-handled tool her godmother had given her at 12. She rose, the silk a quiet sound about her, and she went out upon the landing, and she handed the folded sheet to her own footman, who waited there in plain dark livery, and she said quietly that he was to take it at once to the Marquis of Caversham at the Caversham townhouse in Berkeley Square, and to wait for no answer. The footman bowed. He went. The hall clock below struck the 3/4 as he closed the front door behind him. It was 10:15 of a Thursday, Saturday, morning in the warm, pale yellow June of 1812. She went upstairs to her own bedchamber. She did not call the maid. She unpinned the small wisps at her temples. She drew out the pearl-headed pins from the smooth, low chignon at the nape, and then she pinned the chignon back exactly as it had been, for a woman who is leaving her own house must walk out of it with her hair upon her head. She unhooked the high-waisted ivory silk wedding gown at the shoulder clasp, and she stepped quietly out of it, and she laid it across the bed in a long ivory drift beside the unpinned wedding veil that she had brought up upon her arm. She took down from her small cedarwood press her plain dark grey travelling pelisse with its long sleeves and high collar, and she put it on. She packed her small leather trunk, with her own hands, 3 plain morning gowns, 2 plain nightgowns, her mother's small pearl drop earrings, the small thin gold band that had been her mother's mourning band, and which she would never henceforth take from her left hand, her mother's prayer book, a small worn volume of Cowper, the small ivory-handled sealing tool, the cream paper. By the late afternoon of the Tuesday following, 4 days after the morning of the 18th, the trunk had been carried down to the small post-chaise her godfather had hired for her, and she had taken her place upon the seat, and she had gone west out of London upon the Bath Road, alone, in the plain dark grey travelling pelisse, the clear, cool, sea-blue eyes still steady, the small thin gold band still upon her left hand. She was met 3 days later upon the steps of the small house in Brock Street, Bath, by her late mother's elder sister, Miss Eulalia Brassington, 62 in that summer of 1812, soft silver hair pinned beneath a small white lace cap, clear, cool, sea-blue eyes, the very mirror of Marina's own, fair, lightly lined skin, gentle at the temples, kind, firm mouth, a little tucked at the corners, with the long habit of independence, slender 5'5", upright on the worn doorstep, who took her niece into her arms in a single quiet embrace and said no more than that the front bedchamber was ready and that the tea would be brought in directly. Miss Brassington wore that afternoon her plain, dark grey wool morning gown with the long sleeves and the white lace fichu at the throat, and a small black jet pin in the lace, and she did not ask one question of her niece for 3 days. The year and a half that followed in the small house in Brock Street were a quiet upper chamber of Marina's life, hung with the soft bath light and curtained with her aunt's plain dark grey wool. They walked together along the Crescent in the warm afternoons of the late summer and into the cool grey autumn. They read together by the small parlour fire in the long evenings of 1812 and into the spring of 1813. They spoke very little of the 18th of June, and Miss Brassington never once pressed it, and Marina never once volunteered it. In the late autumn of 1813, Miss Brassington took a small chill upon a Sunday walk along the river. The chill settled into a quiet weariness. The quiet weariness became a quiet sleep. She died peacefully in her own bed in the small front bedchamber of the house in Brock Street upon the cold pale blue Wednesday morning of the 24th of November, 1813, of old age, in her sleep, with her niece's hand in her own. She was 63. The small house in Brock Street was entailed back to a distant cousin of Miss Brassington's, a Mr. Brassington of Shrewsbury, whom Marina had never met and was not now to meet. And Marina, at 19, found herself once again alone with a small trunk and a small inheritance and no roof of her own. Her aunt's old solicitor in Bath, Mr. Gough, a small, precise, quiet gentleman of 50 in plain black, superfine, with clear grey eyes behind small gold-rimmed spectacles and a careful, slow voice, sat with her in the small parlour through 3 afternoons of late November, and settled the small estate, and counted the small annuity, and looked at her over the small gold rims, and said that there was, if she would have it, the offer of a quiet post in Wales, through the office of an old school friend of her late aunt's, at the recommendation of the Reverend Price, vicar of Landforth Wen in Cardiganshire, who required a young woman of education to teach the pianoforte and singing to his daughters, and to one yeoman farmer's child of the parish, 3 days a week, board found, a small stipend, the work quiet, the country plain. Marina, in plain dark grey wool, set her clear, cool, sea-blue gaze upon Mr. Gough, and said she would take the post, and she would take it under her late aunt's name, and she would be henceforth known as Miss Marian Brassington, and no further answer should be required from her upon the subject of her family or her past. Mr. Gough inclined his small, precise grey head, and said only that the matter should be so arranged. She arrived at Landforth Wen on the cold, pale blue Tuesday afternoon of the 11th of February, 1814, in plain dark charcoal grey wool morning gown, plain dark grey travelling pelisse, plain black wool stockings, plain black leather slippers, the small thin gold band of her late mother's mourning still upon her left hand. The Reverend Price received her at the rectory door in his black cassock and white linen surplice. His wife brought tea in the small south parlour. She was shown to the small north chamber over the rectory kitchen, with its single leaded window looking inland to the soft low hills, its plain narrow bed, its small writing desk, its single cane-seated chair. She had been there 4.5 years, upon the cold, pale blue Wednesday afternoon of the 30th of September, 1818. That cold, pale blue Wednesday afternoon, at 3:30 of the clock, 32 leagues to the east, in the long South Library of Caversham Park in Berkshire, the 6th Duke of Caversham was opening his late aunt's small black-lacquered writing cabinet. He was 34 years of age, and he had succeeded to the title in the autumn of 1816 upon his father the 5th Duke's death, and he had spent the 18 months since the funeral at Caversham Park setting his father's affairs in order. He had thick, deep mahogany-brown, wavy hair, deep, warm mahogany with copper lights and firelight, cut close at the nape and just brushing his coat collar, with one premature streak of pure silver above the left temple and one lock fallen across the brow. Clear, cool, grey-green eyes, true, cool grey-green, the colour of a winter Welsh sea under cloud, with flecks of dark gold in firelight under thick, dark lashes that held the steady, considering gaze of a man who had long since learned to listen before he spoke. Fair, faintly weathered skin from country riding, a faint shadow at the jaw clean-shaven, a small, thin, pale scar at the right temple. Not from a duel, but from a fall from a horse in the autumn of 1814 at Caversham during a fox hunt across the South Meadow. He had a strong, angular face, high cheekbones, straight Roman nose, firm, grave mouth, strong, clean-edged jaw with a small, dark mole at the left corner of the lower lip. He was tall, 6'2", lean, broad-shouldered, and when he spoke, his voice was a deep, clear, quiet baritone. He wore that afternoon plain country dress, a black silk mourning band about his left arm for his late aunt, who had died in May at 73 at her townhouse in Brook Street, Mayfair, and whose papers had been forwarded to Caversham Park for settlement in early September. The small black-lacquered writing cabinet had stood upon the long oak side table beneath the South Library window for 3 weeks since its arrival, and he had not until this afternoon found the steady hour to set its drawers in order. He drew up the tall wing chair, and he settled it at the side table, and he turned the small brass key in the small brass lock, and he laid back the lid. The interior smelled faintly of cedar and of his aunt's old rose pastils, and the drawers were lined with cream silk, and the small pigeonholes were filled with neat, folded letters tied with narrow black silk ribbon. He went through them with the slow, patient courtesy of a man settling the dead. He found, in the lowest drawer at the back, beneath a small leather-bound commonplace book, a single folded sheet of cream-laid paper that had been folded once long ago and never since refolded. He took it out. He opened it upon the side table beneath the cold, pale blue late September light from the long south window. He read it through. It was the draft, in his late aunt's own clear, small, precise hand, of the letter that he had been shown at his townhouse in Berkeley Square upon the morning of the 18th of June, 1812, by the same hand that had drafted it, the letter purporting to be from Lady Marina Lockwood to Captain James Lacey of the Foot Guards, dated the 12th of June, 1812, declaring a secret engagement of the spring and the gentleman's certain favour, and an undated meeting at the corner of Mount Street. He knew the hand. He had known it from his boyhood. He sat in the tall wing chair at the long oak side table, with the draft beneath his right hand and the cold, pale blue, late September light upon the cream paper. And he did not move for a long, quiet hour. At the 4:30 he rose. He crossed to the bell-pull beside the chimney-piece. He rang. The bell was answered within 4 minutes by his man of business, Mr. Stanard, who had ridden out from London upon the Tuesday morning and was lodged that week in the small east room. Mr. Stanard was 48, with thinning silver-grey hair carefully combed back from a high, pale forehead, steady grey eyes behind small gold-rimmed spectacles, fair indoor pallor, a long, narrow scholar's face, clean-shaven, tall, 6 foot, thin, slight stoop at the shoulders. He wore plain black, superfine white cravat properly tied, black silk waistcoat, charcoal pantaloons, polished black shoes, and he carried beneath his left arm his leather-bound client's ledger. He came in quietly at the south library door, set the ledger upon the long writing table, and waited in steady professional silence for his grace to speak. Damien gestured to the cream draught upon the oak side table. Mr. Stannard crossed to the side table, set his small gold-rimmed spectacles a half-inch closer upon the bridge of his nose, and read the draft through twice in steady, patient silence. He laid it down. He looked once at his grace. He said only, in the quiet, clipped courtesy of the profession, that the matter should be inquired upon at once, and that he should send a man to Bath upon the dawn coach of the Thursday. By the late afternoon of the cold, pale blue Thursday of the 1st of October, Mr. Stannard's man had returned from Bath with a small folded report under his arm and a small slip of cream paper bearing the careful, slow signature of one Mr. Goff, solicitor of Bath, who had, upon application, produced from his strong box the last known direction of the late Miss Eulalia Brassington's niece. Mr. Stannard set the report before his grace upon the long writing table in the South Library, and Damien read it through in the cold, pale blue October light by the long south window, that Miss Marina Lockwood, in the late autumn of 1813, upon the death of her aunt, Miss Eulalia Brassington of Brock Street, Bath, had taken her aunt's surname privately, had been henceforth known as Miss Marian Brassington, had in early February of 1814 accepted the post of music teacher at the Dame School of the Reverend Price of Llanforthwyn, Cardiganshire, and had lodged these 4.5 years past at the rectory in the small north chamber over the kitchen, and was there at the present hour. Damien read it through twice. He looked once at the cold, pale blue October afternoon through the south library window, where the long shadow of the great cedar lay across the south lawn. He drew breath. He spoke, in his deep, clear, quiet baritone. "Stannard, make the arrangements for Plasseyverne. I shall ride for Wales on Thursday morning at first light." Mr. Stannard inclined his thinning silver-grey head and said only that the arrangements should be made by the first post. He gathered the report and the draft and the leather-bound ledger and withdrew to the small east room to write his letters. Damien remained at the long writing table by the south window. At 5 of the clock, Mr. Tarrant, the butler, came in with the candles. 62 years of age, thinning silver-grey hair brushed carefully back from a high pale forehead, pale blue eyes finely lined at the corners with the long habit of quiet observation, fair pale indoor skin, a long kind face clean-shaven, tall 6 foot, thin upright, in his plain black butler's tailcoat, white cravat properly tied, black silk waistcoat with its small gilt buttons, charcoal pantaloons, polished black shoes, the small black silk mourning band still upon his left arm for the late Lady Olympia Sinclair, and set the 2 tall silver candlesticks in their accustomed places upon the long writing table, and trimmed the wicks with the small silver snuffer, and drew the heavy dark green silk curtains a careful half-foot at either side of the long south window, and inclined his thinning silver-grey head, and withdrew in the steady quiet of 40 years' service. The cold, pale blue Berkshire October dusk gathered upon the south lawn beyond the leaded window. Damien sat at the long writing table with the forged draft open before him under his right hand, and the original he had been shown 6 years earlier, which he had kept locked in this same drawer for these 6 years, and had never destroyed, and had never reread, under his left hand, and he read them through, the one against the other, in the same hand, in the same dry composed ink, in the same Brook Street paper mill watermark. At 5:30, on the cold, pale blue Thursday morning of the 8th of October, 1818, the 6th Duke of Caversham came down the great south steps of Caversham Park in his plain dark grey wool travelling greatcoat with the double cape, his plain dark brown beaver hat in his right hand. He was 34. His thick, deep mahogany brown wavy hair, cut close at the nape and brushing his coat collar, held that single premature streak of pure silver above the left temple. One familiar lock had fallen across the strong, angular brow. His clear, cool, grey-green eyes, the colour of a winter Welsh sea under cloud, were steady in the grey light. His fair, faintly weathered skin showed faint shadow at the strong, clean-edged jaw and the small, thin, pale scar at his right temple. The relic of a 1814 fall from a horse was visible only because the cold had drawn his face pale. He stood tall at 6'2", lean and broad in the shoulder. Beneath the greatcoat, he wore his dark walnut-brown, superfine country travel coat, the buff waistcoat with small silver buttons, the buff breeches, the brown-topped riding boots of soft leather, the white cravat properly tied. On his right hand, the heavy silver Caversham ducal signet, a stag's head couchant over a sheaf of barley, caught the pale light once. Upon his left arm, a small black silk band sat for his late aunt of 5 months gone. At the foot of the steps, the Caversham travelling coach stood ready in black and mulberry, the lamps trimmed and lit, the Caversham crest in painted relief upon the panel, 4 good bays in the traces blowing soft clouds of breath. Upon the box sat Watkins the groom, 35, soft, sandy brown hair beneath the rim of his hat, clear hazel eyes steady upon the leaders, fair tanned skin, clean-shaven, his sturdy 5'10" frame upright in the plain dark green Caversham livery coat with small brass buttons, buff breeches, brown-topped boots. He inclined his head once. The Duke returned it. Mr. Tarrant the butler set the small portmanteau onto the rear seat and closed the door without sound. "I shall send word from Hereford," the Duke said in the deep, clear, quiet baritone. "Look to her ladyship's letters while I am gone." "Your Grace." Watkins gave the leaders their head. The coach moved off down the long drive, and the cold, pale blue October dawn opened behind it over the Berkshire fields. They came, by Reading and the Post Road to Oxford, the bays going steady at 9 miles in the hour, and pulled up a little afternoon to change at the Mitre, and to take a quarter hour for cold beef and bread, which the Duke ate in the coach by the window. He had folded into the breast pocket of his coat the small leather pocket-book, and within it the 2 folded sheets of cream-laid paper. The draft in his late aunt's own hand, which he had drawn from the small black-lacquered writing cabinet in her closed Brook Street house, and the original which had been laid before him at his townhouse on the morning of the 18th of June, 1812. They lay together against his ribs, the proof and the lie that had been built upon it. By the lengthening shadows of the late afternoon, they were through the soft folds of the Cotswold country to Stratford upon Avon, and took rooms at the Falcon a little after 7. The Duke ate alone in a small panelled side parlour by a steady fire, was abed by 10, and lay open-eyed in the high dark four-poster a full hour before sleep came. They were on the road by 6:30 the Friday. The bays went steadily out by Alcester and Pershaw, the soft brown fields of West Worcestershire, stretching grey-green to the long ridge of the Malverns. They took Worcester at a brisk pace at noon, changed horses without coming down, and were down to Hereford by 5:30. At the Green Dragon, the small civil landlord, a short, kindly man who knew the Caversham crest at a glance, and had the sense to make no fuss of it, gave the Duke the long, quiet bedchamber over the side yard and brought him cold pigeon pie and light claret. The Duke walked once round the cathedral close in the dusk. The great red sandstone tower stood plain in the last of the light. He returned, sat half an hour with the pocket-book open, and read again the single composed line which had been Marina's reply. "My lord, the letter you have been shown is not mine." The Saturday was colder still. The post road climbed out of the Wye Valley by Hay and Glassbury, the country growing harder, and the soft Welsh fells lifting in long folds. At Bilth Wells, where the post road crossed the cold blue Wye by the old stone bridge, the Duke stepped down a quarter hour to walk upon the bridge and look down into the cold blue water that ran fast over its dark stones. The wind off the river was sharp. He stood 5 minutes with his gloved hands upon the parapet, then returned to the coach. They lay that night at the Lion at Bilth, the long stone-floored inn under its grey slate roof. The Sunday broke under a long slate-grey sky over the Cardiganshire hills. The country grew wilder and more open, the long bare ridges, the soft turf, the dark slate outcrops, the occasional stone-walled farmstead. A thin cold rain came on at noon and went off again by 2. They crossed the head of the Teifi a little before 4, and as the slate-grey clouds lifted at the western horizon, they came down by a long turf lane between low stone walls to the gates of Plassy Verne. The Trevethan house stood square and plain in pale grey stone above a small park of old oaks, the windows fired pale gold by the late western light. The travelling coach turned in at the gate. By 4:30 it had drawn up at the steps. Lady Cassia Trevethan came out herself onto the steps. She was 30. Her dark mahogany-brown wavy hair was pinned in a smooth low chignon under a small white lace morning cap. Her clear, cool, grey-green eyes, the mirror exact of her brother's own, went over him once with a steady, warm directness. Her fair, faintly freckled skin showed a soft, warm flush at the cheek from the chill. Her oval face was composed in the habitual, easy warmth her household knew. She was slender and upright at 5'6", in a plain, high-waisted, soft lavender silk half-mourning morning gown for their late aunt, with a white lace fichu crossed at the throat. A small black jet brooch sat at the centre of the fichu, a plain gold wedding band lay upon her left hand, and small pearl drop earrings caught the last of the western light. She held her hands out to him without word. "Damien, Cassia. Come within. Rhys is in the south drawing-room." Sir Rhys Trevethan rose from his chair at the hearth as they came in. He was 36, soft, sandy brown hair just brushing his collar, clear, honest hazel eyes, fair, lightly tanned skin, clean-shaven over a kind, open face, tall at 6 foot lean. He wore the plain, dark green country coat, the buff waistcoat, the buff breeches, the brown-topped boots, the white cravat. A small black silk mourning band sat upon his left arm. He came forward and took the Duke's hand gravely. "You are come at last, then," he said in his quiet, Welsh-lilted voice. "Sit, Damien. Cassia shall have the tea up." The south drawing-room was a small, pale room of cream walls, a worn Turkey rug, a long, low window opening westward. A small fire of dry oak burned upon the hearth. The Duke set his greatcoat upon the back of a chair, took the chair at the side of the small mahogany side table, and waited until the tea was brought in and the door closed before he began. He spoke quietly for some 20 minutes by the clock upon the mantel. He told his sister and her husband of his late aunt's death in May, of the forwarding of her papers in early September, of the small black-lacquered writing cabinet in her closed Brook Street house, of the opening of it in the last week of September, and of the draft in her own hand which had lain folded within it. He told them what use his aunt had made of the original on the morning of the 18th of June, 1812, and what he had himself done at 25 to 10 on that same morning. He did not soften. He did not extenuate. Then he drew the small leather pocketbook from the breast pocket of the dark walnut-brown country coat, took from it the 2 folded sheets, and laid them quietly upon the small mahogany side table beneath the lamp. Cassia, the clear, cool, grey-green eyes, flickering once and once only, looked at her brother. Then she leaned forward, set down her tea, and took up the draught. She read it through. She set it upon the table, took up the original, read it through, set it beside the draft. She sat back and was silent a long minute. The small fire crackled softly. Sir Rees reached across and took up the 2 sheets and read each in his turn, the kind, honest hazel eyes growing very grave. He laid them quietly beside his wife's teacup and folded his hands and said nothing. It was Cassia who spoke first. She did not raise her voice. She looked her brother full in the face and said, in her steady, warm, baritone-leaning contralto, "Damien, you will go to Llanforthwyn tomorrow morning at 11, and you will not arrive on horseback in a Caversham travelling coach. You will walk down from Plasy Vern in your country dress, and you will call at the rectory by the front door like any country gentleman come to make a parish inquiry. She must not be made into a small drama on a village green. She has been 4.5 years there as Miss Brassington. She is not your wife yet, and she is not even your reclaimed fiancée. She is a music teacher in a Welsh village, and she has the right of any music teacher in a Welsh village to receive her caller with composure in a small front parlour." The Duke inclined his head once. He did not lift it for a moment, and then he lifted it. "You are right, Cassia." The dinner bell was rung at 7, and the 3 of them went into the small panelled dining room. A clear soup, a small roast capon, buttered Welsh leeks, an apple tart. It was a country dinner served plainly. Sir Rees spoke of the slate quarry at the head of the Teifi, of the late September lambing, of the parish dispute over the South Meadow, which had been adjudicated by the Reverend Price. The Duke listened, answered courteously, drank a single glass of claret. It was over the small dessert plates of late pears that Cassia, setting down her spoon, looked across at her brother and began to speak of what she knew. "I have heard of her these 4 years, Damien, through Mrs. Price at the parish church. I have been at Plasseyburn most summers, and have walked down to St. Lawdog every Sunday I have been here, and taken my tea with the Prices at the rectory on the first Sunday of every August. They speak of her always with quiet respect. I knew her as Miss Brassington. I never connected the name with Lady Marina Lockwood. I had thought of her, in the old way one thinks of a person gone out of one's life, that she had married quietly in the West Country. I had not known." She steadied her voice a moment and continued. "Mrs. Price speaks of her as a young woman of clear, genteel carriage. She has a soft, warm, low voice, a low alto, with the faintest Welsh lilt one acquires by 4 years among the Cardiganshire farms. She has a steady, direct gaze. She is, Mrs. Price says, perfectly the lady and perfectly the gentlewoman, without any pretension at all. She teaches the pianoforte and singing 3 days in the week to the 2 Price girls, Megan, 12, and Anwen, 10. And to the yeoman farmer Probert's eldest daughter Bethan, who is 11 and the cleverest fingers of the 3. She lodges in the small north chamber over the rectory kitchen, and pays her board in the music lessons. She reads aloud at the parish dame school of a Wednesday afternoon. She walks the cliff path from the rectory to the South Head and back, alone, every Sunday after the morning service, in any weather. The Duke had set down his glass. He sat very still in his chair, the clear, cool, grey-green eyes upon his sister's face. "She is well, Damien," said Cassia, in a quieter voice still. "She has made her own life there. She has not been wretched." The Duke inclined his head once. He did not speak for a long minute. Sir Rees, with quiet tact, rose and said he would look in upon the nursery, and left them. Cassia put out her hand across the table and laid it upon her brother's. He did not draw his away. At 10 by the great clock, the Duke rose, kissed his sister upon the brow, gave Sir Rees his hand, and went up by the polished oak stair to the small east bedchamber Cassia had made ready for him. A long, quiet room with a small fire of dry oak upon the hearth. He undressed by the firelight, laid the small leather pocketbook upon the writing table by the bed, and lay down. He slept 3 hours. He woke at 1:30 of the morning, and lay open-eyed by the dying firelight until the cold pale blue of the Monday dawn began at length to come over the eastern fells. He was up at 8:30. He shaved by the small mirror at the washstand and dressed carefully in the plain country morning dress Cassia had bidden him. The dark walnut-brown country morning coat, the buff waistcoat with the small silver buttons fastened to the throat, the buff breeches, the brown-topped boots of soft leather brushed by Watkins to a quiet country shine, the white cravat properly tied, the heavy silver Caversham ducal signet, the stag's head over the sheaf of barley he set upon his right hand, the small black silk mourning band he fastened upon his left arm. He took up no gloves, no greatcoat. The morning was fair, though cold. He went down to the small breakfast parlour at 8 and took bread and a cup of black coffee at the small round table by the window. Cassia came in to him at 8:30 in her plain lavender silk morning gown, sat in the chair opposite him without speaking, took only a cup of tea. The two of them sat in the steady silence of perfect understanding for a quarter of an hour. At a few minutes before 10, she rose, came round the table, laid her hand upon his shoulder a moment, and went out without word. At 10, he set out on foot from the side door of Plasseyburn, down the soft turf cliff path that ran the 3 miles south by southwest to Llanforthwen. The path lifted over the park wall and out onto the open headland, and the long Cardiganshire coast opened before him on the right hand. The cold, pale blue October sea, very calm under the morning, the long horizon of cloud-streaked sky meeting the water in a clean line 3 or 4 leagues out. The dark slate outcrops standing here and there above the soft, cropped turf, the small white and grey gulls turning slowly above the cliff edge. The wind was easterly and light. A little salt was in it. The air was cold, but not bitter. He walked steadily, neither fast nor slow. He passed at the half-mile a small stone farmstead with a wisp of peat smoke going up grey. He passed a small wayside well set in dry stone, with a plain wooden cross above it. The path bent inland to skirt a shallow combe. He crossed the thin stream by a flat slate slab and went on. The sea on his right hand was the colour of the eyes of the woman he had wronged 6 years and 4 months gone. He had known that already. He had not, until this morning, walked beside it. A little before 11, the path came down between 2 low stone walls and out into a soft green lane that ran into the small Welsh village of Llanforthwen. The village green opened below him in soft turf, a small stone bridge over a small stream at its centre, 6 low whitewashed cottages on either hand. At its south end stood the parish church of St. Lordog, the martyr. The whitewashed Norman tower, plain above the slate-roofed nave, the small churchyard, the lych gate. Beside it, set back behind a small kitchen garden and a low stone wall with a painted gate, stood the rectory. A modest 2-storey house of grey Cardiganshire stone, with a long slate roof, 6 leaded windows pale upon its front, a plain wooden front door under a small slate porch. He crossed the green. He went in at the little gate. He went up the 4 worn slate steps of the small porch. He raised the small iron knocker, struck twice, set it gently back, and waited. The door was opened to him by Mrs. Owen, the housekeeper, who was 60, her iron-grey hair pinned beneath the small white linen cap, her clear, hazel, kind eyes lifted to him without surprise, her fair, gently weathered skin, her soft, kind mouth composed, her medium 5'4" frame upright in the plain dark bombazine morning gown, with the white linen apron, her plain black leather shoes upon the slate of the threshold. She inclined her head. "Good morning, sir." The Duke inclined his own. He drew from the breast pocket of the dark walnut-brown country coat a small plain card, and laid it quietly upon her palm. "His Grace the Duke of Caversham, to call upon Miss Brassington if she is at leisure." Mrs. Owen took the card without comment. She stepped back a pace, opened the door fully, and said only in her steady, soft, Welsh-lilted voice, "Step within, Your Grace, if you please." He stepped within. The small front hall of the rectory was a plain square of slate flag, with a worn dark red drugget down its middle, a small oak hat stand against one wall, a low oak side table against the other. A narrow staircase rose at the back. A low oak door stood at his left hand, giving into the small south parlour. Mrs. Owen drew the front door quietly to behind him. "If your Grace will be so good as to wait, Miss Brassington is at her morning lesson. I shall inquire of her." The Duke inclined his head. Mrs. Owen crossed the slate flags, tapped twice upon the low oak door, and went within, drawing it to behind her, but not, as it happened, quite shutting it close. From beyond the closed parlour door, the pianoforte was clearly audible. It was being played slowly and very evenly, the second movement of Mozart's Sonata in C, the Andante of K. 545, the small grave singing line going forward over the soft tread of the left hand in a steady, measured patience. A young hand was at the keys, hesitant only by the fraction of a beat at the turn of one phrase, then steadying again. And over the Andante, low and close and almost in his ear, a young woman's voice spoke a small phrase of correction. A soft, warm, low alto voice, perfectly composed, the faintest trace of a Welsh lilt, softening its English at the vowels. The pianoforte stopped a beat. The voice spoke a second small phrase. The pianoforte resumed. The Duke stood 2 paces from the oak door of the parlour. He did not move. He stood with his beaver hat held quietly in his right hand against his thigh, the heavy silver Caversham signet catching the cold pale light from the leaded window above the front door, and listened to the Mozart and to the soft, warm, low alto correcting the small phrasing within. The inner door opened. Mrs. Owen came out of the south parlour, drew the door to quietly behind her, and crossed the slate flags to him. She inclined her white-capped head. "Miss Brassington shall be at leisure within the half-hour, Your Grace, when the morning lesson concludes." The Duke inclined his head once. "I shall wait." Mrs. Owen inclined her own again, and withdrew without further word toward the kitchen at the back of the hall. He stood in the hall. He did not sit. He did not move toward the small oak chair set against the wall by the hat-stand. He stood quiet, 2 paces from the parlour door, the beaver hat in his right hand, his left hand quiet at his side, with its small black silk mourning band upon the sleeve, and listened to the second movement of Mozart's K. 545 going forward slowly and steadily within the small south parlour beyond the oak door, and to the soft, warm, low alto, perfectly composed, correcting Bethan Probert, who was 11, with soft, pale blonde hair in a single plait and clear, pale blue eyes, very gently upon the small phrasing at the turn of bar 9. The second movement of Mozart's K. 545 came to its quiet final cadence at 11:30 of the cold, pale blue October morning, and the small parlour of the rectory at Llanforthwen fell into that country silence which belongs to a Welsh village on a Monday before noon. The soft tick of the long case clock in the front hall, the faint cry of a gull beyond the cliff path, the slow settling of a small coal in the parlour grate. In the hall, the visitor in his plain country travel dress stood at the leaded window with his plain dark brown beaver hat held in his right hand, and he heard the silence after the last chord with the considering attention of a man who had counted the minutes of 6 years upon it. The parlour door opened. a young woman stepped into the doorway. She was 24. Long, rich, dark chestnut, wavy hair, deep, warm chestnut brown, with copper lights where the leaded window caught it, was pinned smooth in a low chignon at the nape, with small wisps escaped at the temples. Her eyes were a clear, cool sea blue, true cool sea blue, the colour of the Irish Sea under cloud, with flecks of dark gold that he had remembered for 6 years, and had not been certain, before this morning, that he had remembered rightly. Her lashes were thick and dark, her gaze very steady and very direct. Her skin was ivory, fair English skin, with a faint, warm rose flush across the cheekbones, faint freckles across the bridge of the nose, and a small natural beauty mark just above the left corner of her lower lip, which he had once kissed in a London garden in the May of 1812 and had not forgotten. Her face was an oval, the features delicate and fine, the soft, well-shaped mouth at composed quiet, the dark honey-brown brows finely arched, the long, graceful neck very straight. She stood slender and upright at 5'5". She wore a plain, high-waisted, dark charcoal grey wool morning gown, with long sleeves and a white lawn fichu at the throat, plain black wool stockings, plain black leather slippers. At her ears, her late mother's small pearl drop earrings. On her left hand, a small thin gold band, her late mother's mourning band, kept on these 8 years. She wore no other jewellery. She wore no colour. The grey of the wool sat upon her with the composure of long habit. Behind her in the parlour came the 3 pupils with their music books pressed in their arms. Megan Price, at 12, soft mid-brown hair in 2 long plaits, clear hazel eyes, fair lightly freckled skin, slender at 4'10", in plain pale blue cotton schoolgirl's gown with white pinafore. Anwen Price, at 10, soft mid-brown hair in 2 short plaits, clear hazel eyes, slender at 4'6", in plain pale pink cotton schoolgirl's gown with white pinafore. And the yeoman farmer's daughter, Bethan Probert, at 11, soft pale blonde hair in a single plait, clear pale blue eyes, fair lightly tanned skin, sturdy at 4'8", in plain dark blue print cotton gown with white linen pinafore. The girls had a small flush of country exertion upon their cheeks from the Mozart, and they had not yet seen the visitor in the hall. She had. The 2 of them stood 4 feet apart upon the worn Turkey rug of the rectory hall, and for the space of perhaps 4 seconds, neither of them moved. She saw him. 6 years and 4 months had laid a faint additional gravity upon the strong, angular face she had known at 28. The one streak of pure silver above the left temple was new. The small, thin, pale scar at the right temple was new. The small black silk mourning band on the left arm of his plain dark grey travelling greatcoat was new. The rest was the man she had stood ready to marry on the 18th of June, 1812. He saw her. 6 years and 4 months had laid no mark upon her at all that he could find, but for a quiet composure deeper than the composure he remembered, and the plain dark charcoal grey of a country teacher's wool where there had been pale blue silk. From the rear of the house came the firm step of the vicar's wife from her kitchen. Mrs. Price came into the hall at the sound of the parlour door, with her sleeves turned back from her wrists in the manner of a woman who has been chopping apples for the dinner. She was 49, her soft, mid-brown hair pinned beneath a small white lace cap, her clear hazel eyes fixed mildly upon the visitor, her fair, gently weathered skin pleasantly warm from the kitchen fire, her kind, oval face curious but not hurried, her medium, 5'4" plump frame settled in plain dark blue print cotton morning gown with white linen apron and fichu. She did not yet know who the visitor was. Mrs. Owen, the rectory housekeeper, 60, iron grey hair pinned beneath a small white linen cap, clear hazel kind eyes, fair gently weathered skin, soft kind mouth, medium 5'4" upright, in plain dark bombazine morning gown with white linen apron and plain black leather shoes, came forward in steady country quiet from the front door and put the visitor's small white card into Mrs. Price's hand. Mrs. Price read the card. Her clear hazel eyes did not widen. Country composure was the household's habit. She inclined to the visitor the proper country quarter curtsy, and then turned to her girls. "Megan, Anwen, take your books and Bethan into the kitchen for your bread and butter. Bethan, my love, if you will say a good morning to Miss Brassington, you may go home along the cliff path to your mother. She will be looking for you before the noon." Her soft Welsh lilt carried no flutter, only the steady arrangement of a household at midday. "Miss Brassington, His Grace the Duke of Caversham desires the favour of a word with you upon a private matter. You will, I think, wish to receive him in the south parlour. Mrs. Owen shall sit at the door." Megan and Anwen looked once at their visitor with the considering hazel eyes of country children who have seen few dukes, and went past him in soft, small steps into the kitchen passage. Bethan Probert, sturdy and country grave, paused before the teacher she had known these 4.5 years, and made her small, careful Welsh curtsy. "Good morning, Miss Brassington." Marina laid her ungloved right hand upon the child's plaited blonde head for the space of a breath. "Good morning, Bethan. Go safely along the cliff." The child took her music book in both arms and went out by the front door, and the boom of the Irish Sea below the cliff came in for an instant on the cold, pale blue air before the door closed behind her. Marina turned then to her visitor and inclined to him a 1/4 inch of her long, graceful neck, no curtsy beyond it. Her hands she held quietly before her at the waist of the dark charcoal grey wool, fingers loosely linked. She did not lower her clear, cool, sea-blue eyes. He inclined to her with the slow, deep gravity of a tall man at 6'2", the proper full bow of a gentleman who has been kept waiting 6 years. "Miss Brassington," he said, in his deep, clear, quiet baritone. The baritone she had not heard in 6 years and 4 months, and which fell upon the small rectory hall, now with the precise familiarity of a voice remembered exactly. "Forgive the intrusion at the hour. I have come on a private matter of long standing. Might I ask the favour of a private hour, at your own convenience, in any room you should choose?" Marina drew one slow, even breath. The soft, warm, low alto, when it came, carried the faintest trace of a Welsh lilt acquired in 4 years of country teaching. "Your Grace, the south parlour is at your service this morning. Mrs. Price, would you be so good as to send Mrs. Owen in with us? Your Grace, my chaperone will be present at the door." Mrs. Price, the clear hazel eyes flickering once across the visitor's face, as she at last laid the dukedom upon the man before her, inclined. "Mrs. Owen, the south parlour, with your sewing. Your Grace, Miss Brassington, the house is at your disposal. I shall be in the kitchen with the girls." She went, with the steady country composure of a vicar's wife who has received an unannounced peer of the realm into her hall before 11:30 on a Monday, and she did not look back. Mrs. Owen took up her small work-basket from the side table in the hall. Marina turned and walked before her visitor into the south parlour. The south parlour was a small room of pale cream walls, and it caught the late morning light from a single leaded window opening upon the small rectory garden, and, beyond the garden wall, upon the soft turf of the cliff path, and, beyond the cliff path, upon the cold, pale blue October Irish Sea, visible in the distance under a pale blue October sky. A plain mahogany pianoforte stood at the south wall, with the Mozart score open upon its stand at the close of the second movement of K. 545. 2 oxblood leather armchairs stood drawn up to the small marble fireplace, in which a small coal fire burned with the steady country economy of a country rectory. A small mahogany side table stood between the 2 armchairs. A small worn turkey rug lay upon the dark-stained boards. There was a plain upright chair by the door for the chaperone. Mrs. Owen took the upright chair by the door and laid her sewing upon her knee. She did not raise her head to look at the gentleman. She had been 24 years in the rectory, and she knew the proper composure of a chaperone of 60. Marina took the right-hand armchair. The Duke of Caversham, with the slow, steady considering attention of a man entering at long last the room he had ridden 4 days across England and Wales to enter, took the left. For a moment neither spoke. The small coal in the grate settled with a soft sound. Beyond the leaded window, the cold pale blue October sea lay quiet under its pale blue sky. He set his plain dark brown beaver hat upon the small side table. He drew his plain dark grey wool travelling greatcoat back upon his shoulders. The heavy silver Caversham ducal signet, the stag's head over the sheaf of barley, caught the light once upon his right hand. He spoke then in his steady, deep, quiet baritone, and he told her the story in plain narrative order, as a man tells a thing to one whose right it is to know. On the 14th of May of this present year, 1818, my late paternal aunt, Lady Olympia Sinclair, 73, the younger sister of my late father, the 5th Duke, died at her town house in Brook Street, Mayfair, of a sharp influenza taken in the cold April. I did not attend her death. I was at Caversham Park in Berkshire upon estate business at the time. My uncle by marriage was long since dead, and my aunt had never wed. Her household was small, and her servants gave her every proper attention to the last. She was buried in the family vault on the 17th of May. I attended the funeral. Her papers were sealed by her solicitor at Brook Street and were forwarded to me at Caversham Park for settlement in the first week of September. I did not at once open them. The harvest was on the estate, and I had no expectation that her papers should contain anything of moment to me beyond the disposition of her plate and her small Welsh cobalt service. Upon the afternoon of Wednesday the 30th of September, having concluded the harvest accounts, I went into the small library in which the cases had been stored, and I began the work. Among my aunt's effects was a small black-lacquered writing cabinet of Dutch make, which I had not before seen. It was locked. The smaller of the keys upon her chatelaine, returned with the papers by her solicitor, opened it. Within the cabinet, in a small thin portfolio of cream paper tied with a faded crimson ribbon, lay the draft, in my aunt's own hand, of a letter purporting to be from one Marina Lockwood to a Captain James Lacey of the Foot Guards, dated the 12th of June, 1812. I recognized at once my aunt's hand. I sat 1 hour with the draft in my hand. I did not at first move. I understood at the end of that hour that I had broken the engagement of the spring of that year upon a forgery of my aunt's making, and that I had carried 6 years and 4 months of misunderstanding without cause. I sent at first light upon the Thursday for my solicitor, Mr. Stanard. He came down from London upon the same Thursday evening. We sat together with the draft upon the 1st of October. The inquiry into your present whereabouts was begun upon that day through your late aunt, Miss Brassington's old solicitor at Bath. Upon the morning of Wednesday the 7th of October, Mr. Stannard came down to me at Caversham with the address. I rode for Wales upon the cold, pale blue Thursday morning of the 8th of October. I arrived yesterday afternoon at Plasseyverne by the cliff path, and I have spent the night beneath my sister Cassia's roof. She counselled me to come down to you upon a Monday morning at 11, at the hour you teach your pupils, in plain country dress on foot, that I should not make of you a small drama upon a village green. I have done as she advised. I am here. He paused. He drew from the inner pocketbook of his dark walnut-brown, superfine country travel coat 2 folded sheets of cream-laid paper. The first he laid upon the small mahogany side table between them, with the slow, careful gravity of a man laying a thing of weight before the only judge of it. It was the original cream sheet he had been shown upon the morning of his wedding, 6 years and 4 months earlier. The sheet sealed once with the Caversham ducal crest, that seal long broken into its small, soft red flake, the paper a little softened at the folds with much carrying. The second he laid beside it, the draft from his aunt's black lacquered cabinet, unsealed, the same hand, the same ink, and, when the two were held up against the cold, pale blue October light from the leaded window, the same Brook Street paper mill watermark, visible like a faint stag's head beneath the laid lines of each. He did not speak as he laid them down. He sat back in the left-hand oxblood leather armchair. Marina drew her hands quietly out from her lap and took up the two sheets. She read the original first. Her clear, cool, sea-blue eyes moved steadily over the 4 lines of his aunt's forged hand from the top to the foot, and she did not flinch. She set the original down. She took up the draft. She read it. She read the original once more, and once more the draft. She held them then together against the leaded window, and the small, faint stag's head watermark stood up clear in each. She laid them down side by side upon the side table. She was silent then, a long minute. The small coal in the grate settled. Mrs. Owen at the door drew one slow, even stitch through her linen. The cold, pale blue October sea beyond the leaded window did not stir. When she spoke at last, her soft, warm, low alto carried no tremor. The faint Welsh lilt was steady upon the English vowels. "Your Grace, I am sorry your aunt is dead. I should have liked her to know that I had survived her. I am also sorry that you carried 6 years of misunderstanding alone. That ought not to have been your share to carry. The note you sent me on the morning of the 18th of June, 1812, I have kept in the small writing desk in the north chamber over this rectory's kitchen these 4.5 years. I had not, in those years, expected you. Will you tell me what you have come to say?" He sat one moment. He drew one slow, even breath. The deep, clear, quiet baritone, when he spoke, was as steady as the cold, pale blue October sea beyond the leaded window. "Lady Marina, I have come, 6 years and 4 months too late, to ask you whether the engagement of the spring of 1812 might be considered to stand. The fault of those 6 years was wholly mine. The injury of the morning of the 18th of June was wholly yours. The decision of this present afternoon is wholly yours. I ask nothing in this hour but the favour of a single answer to a single question, and I shall accept whatever answer it pleases you to make." She did not at once answer. She sat a long, composed minute in the right-hand oxblood leather armchair, with her hands folded again quietly in her lap, fingers loosely linked. She looked once at Mrs. Owen at the upright chair at the door, who did not raise her head from her linen. She looked once at the cold, pale blue October sea beyond the leaded window, lying steady under its pale blue sky. She looked once at her hands folded composedly in her lap, at the small, thin gold mourning band upon her left hand. She drew one quiet breath. The soft, warm, low alto came steady from the long, graceful throat. "Your Grace, I require 6 months." He inclined deeply, the strong, clean-edged jaw set steady, the one fallen lock of deep mahogany hair across the brow. 6 months are your right. I shall be at Plasseyburn with my sister for the season. May I call upon you at the rectory once each week at an hour you shall name, at 3 of a Tuesday afternoon, in the south parlour, with Mrs. Owen present, at 3 of a Tuesday afternoon. He rose. The tall, lean, broad-shouldered frame at 6 feet 2 stood for a moment between the two oxblood leather armchairs in the small, pale cream parlour, and he inclined to her at the parlour door with the proper full bow of a man who has been given 6 months and considers himself richly used. She rose and inclined to him a 1/4 inch. He inclined then to Mrs. Owen at the chaperone's chair with the proper full bow of a gentleman to the upper servant of the house, and Mrs. Owen rose in country composure and inclined her grey head. He took up his plain dark brown beaver hat from the small side table. He went out of the south parlour, across the front hall, by the front door of the rectory. Mrs. Owen closed the door behind him quietly. He walked the 3 miles back up the cliff path to Plasseyverne in the cold blue October afternoon. The path rose in soft turf above the long fall of the cliff to the Irish Sea. The gulls cried thinly above him in the cold pale blue air. The sea was quiet under cloud, the colour of his lady's eyes. He did not hurry. He had been given 6 months. He meant to walk them out in his own steady country pace. He arrived at Plasseyverne at 3:30 of the afternoon. The long, low Welsh manor house lay grey upon its small rise of turf above the cliff, with the cold, pale blue October light upon its leaded windows. He went in by the south door. His sister Cassia Trevethan was at her embroidery in the south drawing-room. She was 30, dark mahogany brown, wavy hair pinned in a smooth low chignon under a small white lace morning cap, clear, cool, grey-green eyes, the mirror of her brother's, fair, faintly freckled skin, soft, well-shaped mouth in habitual, easy warmth, slender 5'6" upright, in plain high-waisted, soft lavender silk, half-morning gown for their late aunt, with white lace fichu, small black jet brooch at the throat, plain gold wedding band, and small pearl drop earrings. She did not rise as he came in. She only looked up from her small linen panel with the quiet, considering gaze that had been her brother's particular comfort since their childhood. He stood a moment upon the worn Welsh turkey rug in the south drawing-room of his sister's house. He said only this: "She has given me 6 months. I shall call at 3 on Tuesday." Cassia inclined. She did not weep. She did not laugh. She only inclined, and rose then from her low embroidery chair, and crossed the rug in 3 soft steps of her plain lavender silk, and laid her right hand upon her brother's shoulder, and kissed him once upon the cheek, in the steady habit of a sister of 30, whose brother has been 6 years too long alone. She did not speak. She turned and went back across the rug, and resumed her seat, and took up her small panel of linen, and drew one slow, even stitch. Beyond the leaded window of the south drawing-room, the cold, pale blue October afternoon lay across the cliff path to Llanforth Wen. The Irish Sea moved slow and grey beneath the sky. The first faint mist of a Welsh October dusk rose from the soft turf along the line of the cliff. A gull cried thinly beyond the bay, and was answered by another down the coast. The light upon the leaded panes thickened, slow and steady, to the soft fall of evening. The wheels of the country gig that had carried Damien Alexander Sinclair, 6th Duke of Caversham, the 3 miles down from Plasseyverne, halted at the white-painted front gate of the rectory garden on the warm, pale yellow Tuesday afternoon of the 19th of October, 1818. He was 34. He wore his dark walnut-brown superfine country morning coat, his buff waistcoat with the small silver buttons, his buff breeches, his brown-topped riding boots of soft leather, his white cravat properly tied, the heavy silver Caversham ducal signet, a stag's head over a sheaf of barley upon his right hand, and the small black silk mourning band for his late aunt above the cuff of his left sleeve. His thick, deep mahogany brown wavy hair with the one premature streak of pure silver above the left temple was cut close at the nape and brushing his coat collar, and the one fallen lock lay across his brow. His clear, cool, grey-green eyes were steady upon the rectory door. He came up the flagged path. He lifted the small brass knocker. He let it fall once. Mrs. Owen, 60. Her iron-grey hair pinned beneath a small white linen cap, her clear hazel-kind eyes, her fair, gently weathered skin, her soft, kind mouth, her plain, dark bombazine morning gown with white linen apron and the plain black leather shoes, opened the rectory door to him and inclined a small composed curtsy from her medium upright 5 and 4. She took his hat, his gloves, and his greatcoat into her keeping, and she showed him through the narrow stone-flagged hall to the small south parlour. The small south parlour of the rectory of Llanforthwen held a small newly lit fire upon its marble hearth, and the warm yellow October light came in through the leaded window in slanting bars across the worn turkey rug. 2 oxblood leather armchairs faced each other across a small mahogany table. The pianoforte stood in the far corner with its lid closed. Marina Lockwood, who at 24 had been 4.5 years known to the village by her late aunt's surname of Brassington, sat composedly in the right-hand armchair, with her hands folded in her lap, her long, rich, dark chestnut, wavy hair, deep, warm chestnut brown with copper lights, was pinned smooth in a low chignon at her nape, with small wisps escaped at her temples. Her clear, cool, sea-blue eyes, the colour of the Irish sea under cloud, were very steady. Her ivory fair skin showed the faint warm rose flush across the cheekbones, the faint freckles across the bridge of her nose, and the small natural beauty mark just above the left corner of her lower lip. She wore the plain high-waisted, dark charcoal grey wool morning gown, with long sleeves and the white lawn fichu at the throat, that had been her observance these 4.5 years, plain black wool stockings, plain black leather slippers, her late mother's small pearl drop earrings, and on her left hand the small thin gold mourning band that had been her late mother's. Mrs. Owen took her upright chair beside the parlour door, drew her plain work basket onto her knee, threaded her needle, and bent her iron grey head to her sewing. The clock on the parlour mantel struck 3. Damien inclined to Marina with the long grave incline of a gentleman, to a lady whose pardon he must yet earn. He took the left-hand armchair across from her. He set his hands upon his knees. He spoke first, in his deep, clear, quiet baritone. He told her, in small composed sentences, of his late father the 5th Duke's quiet death in the autumn of 1816 at Caversham Park in Berkshire, of his own succession to the title that October, of the 18 months of mourning he had held in the country among his father's small books and small letters, of the May morning of 1818, when his late aunt, Lady Olympia, had died at her townhouse in Brook Street, and of the September morning when her papers had reached him for settlement. Marina listened. She did not interrupt. When he had finished, in her soft, warm, low alto with the faintest trace of a Welsh lilt, she told him of her aunt Eulalia Brassington's quiet death in Bath in the late November of 1813, of the small dame school of the Reverend Price at Llanforthwen, to which she had come in the early spring of 1814, of the 4.5 years of country teaching she had kept since. She named to him her 3 pupils, Megan Price, 12, with soft mid-brown hair in 2 long plaits, Anwen Price, 10, with the same hair in 2 short plaits, and Bethan Probert, 11, the yeoman farmer's daughter from the small holding above the village, with soft, pale blonde hair in a single plait. She told him that the second movement of K 545 had occupied them since the Lammas term. At the 1/4 the hour they read. Marina took up a small calf-bound copy of Mr. Cowper's Task from the table, and read aloud 20 pages in her soft, warm, low alto, the long composed lines of the country, evening at Olney falling clear upon the parlour. Damien took the volume in his turn, and read aloud 20 pages in his deep, clear, quiet baritone, and the small fire ticked in the grate as the apple wood caught down to its embers. At 4:15, Damien rose. He inclined to Marina at the parlour door. He inclined to Mrs. Owen at the chaperone's chair. He went out. Mrs. Owen closed the rectory door behind him quietly. The next Tuesday came. It was the 26th of October. The country gig drew up at the white-painted gate. Damien, in the dark walnut-brown country morning coat and the brown-topped boots and the small black silk morning band, lifted the brass knocker. Mrs. Owen showed him in. Marina sat in the right-hand armchair in the plain, high-waisted, dark charcoal grey wool gown with the white lawn fichu, her hands composed in her lap. The clock struck 3. They spoke of his late father's library, of the small books his father had loved, of the cold blue Berkshire winters at Caversham Park. They read. He read first, 20 pages of Mr. Cowper. She read after him. At the 4:15, he rose and inclined and went. The Tuesday following, the 2nd of November, the rain came down through the morning, and Damien came in with the small bright drops on his greatcoat. The small fire on the hearth was hotter on the wet day. Marina, in the dark charcoal grey wool, set her hands in her lap and inclined her steady direct gaze upon him as he took the chair across from her. They spoke of her late father, the 10th Earl of Lockwood, who had died in the spring of 1810, of her late mother, who had died in the autumn of 1809, of her godfather's small house in Welbeck Street, which she had quitted within the week of the 18th of June, 1812. They read Mr. Cowper. He rose at the 4:15 and inclined and went. The 9th of November, a clear cold blue Tuesday, was the 3rd of the 4. Damien spoke that afternoon of the Stannard inquiry, of Lincoln's Inn, of the long quiet hour he had sat in his late aunt's small black-lacquered writing cabinet in the last week of September, with the draft of the forged letter laid open upon his knee. Marina listened, her clear, cool, sea-blue eyes very steady upon his face. And when he had finished, she said only in her soft, warm, low alto that she was glad he had not had to discover the matter alone in a strange place. She read Mr. Cowper to him for 20 pages. He read to her for 20 more. The 16th of November, a cold, pale yellow Tuesday with the first frost upon the rectory garden, was the 4th. They spoke that afternoon of small country present things, of the apple store, of the kitchen garden behind the rectory wall, of the Price daughters' lessons, of the small herd of Welsh black cattle the Reverend Price's churchwarden ran upon the cliff pasture. Damien did not ask the question of October the 12th again. Marina did not raise it. At the 4:15, he rose and inclined and went. On the warm, clear Wednesday afternoon of the 18th of November, 1818, a different carriage drew up at the rectory gate. Lady Cassia Trevethan, née St. Clair, 30, the sister of the present Duke of Caversham and the wife of Sir Rhys Trevethan of Plassy-Verne, came down from it in her plain high-waisted, soft lavender silk half-mourning gown, with the white lace fichu, the small black jet brooch pinned beneath, the plain gold wedding band and the small pearl drop earrings, her dark mahogany-brown wavy hair, the mirror of her brother's, was pinned in a smooth low chignon beneath a small white lace morning cap. Her clear, cool, grey-green eyes, the mirror also of her brother's, held the habitual easy warmth of her oval face. She was slender and 5 and 6 and very upright. She carried a small posy of late autumn dahlias, deep crimson and pale apricot, cut that morning from the Plassy-Verne garden border. Mrs. Price, 9 and 40, her soft mid-brown hair pinned beneath a small white lace cap, her clear hazel eyes, her fair, gently weathered skin, her kind oval face, her plain dark blue print cotton morning gown with the white linen apron and fichu, medium and plump and upright, came from the rectory kitchen drying her hands upon her apron and dipped a small composed curtsy to the lady at her door, and showed her through the stone-flagged hall to the small south parlour where Marina was. Cassia took the small posy of dahlias from her gloved hand and laid them on the small mahogany table. She took both of Marina's hands in both of her own. She said only, in her soft, well-shaped mouth's habitual, easy warmth, "Miss Brassington, my brother has spoken to you and I have spoken to him. May we walk along the cliff path this afternoon?" They walked. The cold blue Cardiganshire afternoon was over the sea, and the first hard wind of November came up the cliff from the long horizon of the Irish Sea. Cassia spoke as she walked. She told Marina the story of Lady Olympia from her own side. How, in the early spring of 1810, their late aunt had taken against the Lockwood family on the occasion of a small affront, half imagined and quite untraceable, given at a Brook Street dinner of 23 covers. How the aunt had spoken sharply of the Earl of Lockwood's daughter in the drawing-rooms of Mayfair through the spring of 1812, and how Cassia, then a young married woman of 22, had thought it only the small jealousy of an unmarried elderly sister of a duke. How the broken engagement of the 18th of June, 1812, had struck her as strange and ugly, but how she had not known what to do, for her brother had set himself in a quiet that had admitted of no question. How in the years that had followed she had thought often of what had become of her would-be sister-in-law. Marina, in the dark charcoal-grey wool gown, beneath a plain dark grey wool walking cloak, listened in steady composure. And at the cliff-top turn, she laid her gloved hand once for a long quiet breath upon Cassia's gloved arm, and said only, "Lady Treverton, I am very glad to know you." The Wednesday afternoon walk became a Tuesday and Wednesday rhythm. Cassia came to the rectory most Wednesdays through the rest of November and through the cold blue weeks of December, bringing dahlias at first, and then late chrysanthemums, and at last small sprigs of winter holly with the red berries hard upon them, and they walked the cliff path together. The Christmas Eve of 1818 fell upon a clear, cold blue Thursday, and Marina dined at Plasseyverne. It was the first time she had crossed the threshold. She wore plain dark green silk, a high-waisted, long-sleeved silk gown that Cassia had quietly sent down by the Plasseyverne seamstress the week before, with no fuss and no card, and a small composed message that ran only the green is for Christmas Eve, and the gown is yours either way. And at her throat, the small white lawn fichu, and at her ears, the small pearl-drop earrings of her late mother, and the small, thin gold mourning band of her late mother on her left hand still. Damien wore the full evening mourning of his 18 months, black, superfine evening tailcoat, black silk waistcoat, black satin knee breeches, white silk stockings, white cravat, the small black silk mourning band upon his left sleeve, the Caversham ducal signet upon his right hand. Sir Rhys Treverton, 36, his soft, sandy brown hair just brushing his collar, his clear, honest hazel eyes, his fair, lightly tanned, clean-shaven skin, his kind, open face, tall, 6 and lean, and the faint Welsh lilt in his speech, in his plain, dark green country evening coat for the night, presided at the long table in the small dining-room of Plasseyverne with quiet courtesy. Cassia sat at the foot. Damien sat at her right hand. Marina sat at Sir Rhys's right hand. After dinner, they went into the long gallery, where the fire was high, and the Treverton children were brought down by their nurse. Hywell, 6, in a small, dark blue velvet jacket, climbed first onto Marina's lap. Mare, 4, in a small, pale pink muslin frock, climbed after him a moment later, and laid her soft, sleepy head against Marina's shoulder. Marina set her gloved hand upon the small, dark blue velvet shoulder of the boy, and her bare hand upon the soft, pale pink muslin sleeve of the girl, and she laughed once, a small, composed laugh of 2 notes only, the first a quiet half-sound, and the second a fuller, warm, low alto note that fell into the long gallery as plainly as a single bell. Damien, crossed the long gallery in his black evening tailcoat with the glass of port in his hand, looked once. He said nothing. He looked away. He went back to his glass. In the second week of January, 1819, the London rumour began. It had its first small whisper at Almack's on the Wednesday evening of the 13th. An elderly friend of the late Lady Olympia, Mrs. Carrickfergus of South Audley Street, gave it about in the upper rooms that the present Duke of Caversham was courting in Wales, that the lady was the same Lady Marina Lockwood who had been broken off from him in June 1812, that the Sinclair family must be scandalised, and that the late aunt had, after all, had her reasons. By the Friday following, the matter had reached Lady Jersey's morning visiting hour, and by the Tuesday following, the 19th, it had reached the Duchess of Devonshire's. The Duchess of Devonshire wrote to Lady Cassia Trevethan at Plassey-Verne by the post of the 20th of January, in 3 short pages of plain Berkeley Square paper, asking for an account from the family. Cassia read the letter on the morning of the 23rd. She showed it without remark to Sir Rees. She showed it without remark to her brother. She said only, "This will be put right in a fortnight." She took the post-chaise from Plassey-Verne on the cold, pale blue Monday morning of the 25th, reached the Trevethan townhouse in Berkeley Square by the Thursday evening, and on the Friday she went to Devonshire House. She told the Duchess the story plainly, of the small black lacquered writing cabinet at Brook Street, of the draft of the forged letter, of the original beside it in the same hand, of her brother's 6 years' silence under the misapprehension. It's of the lady at Llanfwrthwen who had taken 6 months of consideration, as was her right. The Duchess listened. The Duchess set the matter straight in her own drawing-room within the week. Cassia called next at Lady Jersey's. She called after at Lady Sefton's. She returned by post-chaise to Plassey-Verne on the Monday the 8th of February, and by the middle of February the rumour at Almack's had quieted to nothing. The Tuesday afternoons in the small south parlour at the rectory went on. The frost lay hard upon the rectory garden through the first half of February, and the small fire on the marble hearth was kept high. The clock struck 3. Mrs. Owen sat in her upright chair by the door with her sewing. Marina read. Damien read. At the close of the visit, by Mrs. Owen's quiet permission given without a word the first Tuesday she gave it and not withdrawn after, they walked together along the cliff path above the bay for the half-hour before the dusk. They did not touch beyond the small composed brush of his gloved hand at the parlour door, as she went past him to take her cloak from Mrs. Owen's keeping. He did not offer his arm upon the cliff path, and she did not take it. They walked side by side. They did not speak of the proposal of October the 12th. Damien did not ask. Marina did not raise it. March came in cold and pale and quiet. The first hard buds were upon the hawthorn in the 3rd week of the month. The Tuesday afternoons were unchanged. The clock struck 3. The clock struck 4. The clock struck the 4:15. Damien rose and inclined and went. Mrs. Owen closed the rectory door behind him. The small composed silence of the small south parlour after his going held for a long quiet minute, and then the kettle would be heard in the rectory kitchen, and Mrs. Price's step would come along the stone-flagged hall. Easter Sunday fell upon the 11th of April, 1819. The morning was warm and pale yellow, and the first hawthorn in white flower had come out in the night along the lanes that ran down from Plassey-Verne to the village of Llanfwrthwen. The parish service at St. Lawdog, the martyr above the bay, began at 10:30. The Reverend Price, 53, his soft sandy grey hair finely thinning at the crown, his clear honest hazel eyes behind the small gold-rimmed spectacles, his fair gently weathered skin, his long kind clean-shaven face, medium 5 and 10 and thin, with the slight scholar's stoop and the soft Welsh lilt in his speech, In his black cassock with the white linen surplice over and the white collar band and the small silver crucifix on the black silk cord, climbed the small wooden steps to his small wooden pulpit at the 11:15 and preached for 25 minutes upon the duty of patience over long years. His text was St. Mark the 4th at the 26th verse to the 29th. The seed that a man casteth into the ground, and sleepeth, and riseth night and day. The seed that springeth and groweth up, he knoweth not how. For the earth bringeth forth fruit of herself, first the blade, then the ear, after that the full corn in the ear. And when the fruit is brought forth, immediately he putteth in the sickle, because the harvest is come. He spoke quietly. He spoke of the long dark of the earth, in which the seed lay unseen, of the small green blade that came in its season, of the patience that was required of the husbandmen, and that was a small reflection of the patience that the Almighty himself showed his own creatures in the long ripening of their hearts. Marina sat that morning in the rectory pew, between Mrs. Price in her plain dark blue print cotton and Megan Price in her plain pale blue Sunday cotton, her own gown the plain dark charcoal grey wool still. Damien sat across the aisle in the Plazy Wern pew, between Cassia in her soft lavender silk and Cerise in his plain dark green country coat. He wore the dark walnut-brown country morning coat and the buff waistcoat and the small black silk mourning band. After the service, the small congregation walked out through the south porch onto the cliff path, and the first hawthorn was in white flower along the lanes, and the Irish Sea ran cold blue and quiet below. The Tuesday afternoon of the 13th of April, 1819. The last of the 6 months that had been agreed in the small south parlour on the morning of Monday the 12th of October came in cold and pale blue. The wind from the bay was small. The first hawthorn had begun to drop its earliest petals along the lanes. Marina, at 3 o'clock, sat in the right-hand oxblood leather armchair in the small south parlour, and she did not wear the plain, high-waisted, dark charcoal grey wool morning gown of the 4.5 years. She wore the plain, high-waisted, soft, pale blue wool morning gown with long sleeves and the white lawn fichu at the throat. The charcoal grey she had put off, for it had been her own quiet observance and not the world's, and the observance had had its long term, and its term was at its close. The pianoforte stood in the far corner, with its lid raised. The small calf-bound Mozart score lay open upon her knee. At K 545, Mrs. Owen sat in her upright chair by the door with her work-basket on her knee, and her needle steady. The cold, pale blue April light came in through the leaded window in long, thin bars across the worn turkey rug. The clock on the small marble parlour mantel struck the 2:75. She waited. The clock in the south parlour of the small whitewashed Welsh rectory at Llanforthwyn struck 3 upon the cold, pale blue Tuesday afternoon of the 13th of April, 1819. And at the third stroke, the bell at the front door rang out across the narrow flagged hall. Lady Marina Lockwood, 24, slender 5'5", upright in plain high-waisted, soft pale blue wool morning gown with long sleeves and a white lawn fichu folded at the throat, the dark charcoal grey of 4.5 quiet years now put off, her long, rich, dark chestnut wavy hair pinned smooth in a low chignon at the nape, her clear, cool, sea-blue eyes very steady, her late mother's small, thin gold mourning band kept on the third finger of her left hand, her late mother's small pearl drop earrings at her ears, plain ivory silk slippers showing at the hem, sat composed in the right-hand oxblood leather armchair beside the hearth with the Mozart score of K 545 open upon her knee. Mrs. Owen, 60, the rectory's housekeeper, her iron-grey hair pinned beneath a small white linen cap, medium 5'4", upright in plain dark bombazine morning gown with white linen apron, her clear hazel-kind eyes set upon the front door, crossed the flagged hall and lifted the latch. Damien Alexander Sinclair. 6th Duke of Caversham, 34, tall 6 feet, too lean, broad-shouldered, his thick, deep mahogany brown wavy hair, cut close at the nape, with the one premature streak of pure silver above the left temple and the one lock fallen across the brow, his clear, cool, grey-green eyes very steady, the small, thin, pale scar at his right temple plain in the cold blue light, the small dark mole at the left corner of his firm, grave mouth set, stood upon the rectory step in dark walnut-brown country morning coat of fine, superfine buff waistcoat with small silver buttons, buff breeches, brown-topped boots of soft leather, white cravat properly tied, the Caversham ducal signet of heavy silver upon his right hand. The small black silk mourning band for his late aunt had been put off 3 days previous, upon her 12-month anniversary. The left sleeve showed nothing now but the plain superfine cuff. He took off his plain dark brown beaver hat as he crossed the threshold. Mrs. Owen received it from him in steady country gravity, and inclined her grey head 1/4 of an inch. "Your Grace, Lady Marina is in the south parlour." "Thank you, Mrs. Owen." She drew the door open. She did not announce him. She stood back. Marina set the Mozart score upon the small mahogany table at her elbow without haste, folded her hands quietly in her lap, and lifted her clear, cool, sea-blue eyes to her visitor. He crossed the worn turkey rug to the left-hand ox-blood leather armchair across the hearth and took his accustomed seat. Mrs. Owen drew the door to 1/4 inch open and stood in the hall, just beyond the jamb in the housekeeper's customary station of these last 6 months. The cold, pale blue April light came in slantwise through the leaded window. The small fire on the parlour hearth was quietly steady. Neither spoke for the space of 4 breaths. Then Damien, in his deep, clear, quiet baritone. "Lady Marina, the 6 months are at their close. I had said in October that I would ask one single question of you, and accept whatever answer you should make. May I ask it?" Marina, in her soft, warm, low alto, with the faintest trace of a Welsh lilt. "You may, Your Grace." He drew one breath. He held her clear, cool, sea-blue gaze, with his own clear, cool, grey-green gaze without flinching. "Will you, Lady Marina Lockwood, do me the honour of becoming, as you should have done on the 18th of June, 1812, at greater leisure and on better evidence, my wife?" She was silent, the small composed silence of perhaps 4 breaths. The clock upon the parlour mantel ticked through it. Then, very quietly, with no tremor to mark the 4½ years that lay behind the answer. "Your Grace, I shall." He rose from the armchair without haste. He crossed the small worn turkey rug in 3 steady steps. He sank upon one knee at her chair. He took her right hand, ungloved, soft and slender and warm, into his own ungloved right hand, bearing the heavy silver Caversham ducal signet. He bent his deep mahogany brown head. He kissed the back of her hand once, very lightly for the space of a breath. He drew her hand down again to rest upon her knee. He did not draw her up out of the armchair. He did not draw her to him. He rose. He stood a moment looking down upon her, the one lock of mahogany brown hair fallen as ever across his brow. She lifted her sea-blue eyes to him in steady, composed quiet. The small, faint, warm rose flush had risen across her cheekbones. The small natural beauty mark, just above the left corner of her lower lip, showed plain in the pale light. He inclined his head once. He returned across the rug to his own armchair. He sat. Mrs. Owen at the door had not moved. They sat the half-hour out in the accustomed Tuesday quiet. He said once, that he would walk up to Plasseyvern that afternoon and tell his sister. She inclined her dark chestnut head a quarter inch. He said once that Mr. Stannard should be summoned from London within the week. She inclined her head again. At 3:45 he rose. She rose with him. He took up his beaver hat as Mrs. Owen drew the door open. He walked the 3 miles up the cliff path. The April wind off the Irish Sea came thin and clear across the long turf slope. The gulls cried over the cold blue water. The cliff-edge gorse was just breaking into its small bright yellow. He reached the iron gates of Plasseyvern at 4:30. The house stood plain and grey-stoned upon its small Welsh promontory above the bay. The south drawing-room windows showed warm with a small, steady fire. He went in by the south porch. The Plasseyvern butler took his greatcoat and his beaver hat in steady gravity, and inclined his white head toward the south drawing-room door. Lady Cassia Trevethan, née Sinclair, 30. Damien's younger married sister, slender 5'6" upright, her dark mahogany-brown wavy hair pinned in a smooth, low chignon under a small white lace morning cap, her clear, cool, grey-green eyes the mirror of her brother's, her fair, faintly freckled skin warm in the firelight, her oval face and soft, well-shaped mouth in habitual, easy warmth, in plain, high-waisted, soft lavender silk, half-mourning morning gown with white lace fichu, small black jet brooch at throat, plain gold wedding band, small pearl drop earrings, sat in the right-hand wing chair at the hearth with her tambour frame upon her knee. She lifted her eyes as her brother came in at the doorway. He said only, very quietly, "Cassia, she has accepted me." The tambour frame slipped from her knee to the hearthrug. Cassia wept once. A single short, broken sound, neither sob nor cry, and laughed through it in the same breath, a wet, warm, short laugh that was half a sister's and half a Sinclair's. And she rose without thought for the embroidery, crossed the rug in 4 quick steps in her plain ivory silk slippers, and put her arms about her brother's lean, broad shoulders in one steady embrace. He returned the embrace once, his right hand at her lavender silk back. He did not weep. She drew back. She took both his hands into hers. At 3:00 then, in the south parlour, with Mrs. Owen at the door. At 3:00, with Mrs. Owen at the door. And she said, "Your Grace, I shall." Cassia closed her eyes a moment. She opened them again upon her brother's face. "Then, Damien, you are a very fortunate man. I know it, Cassia." The south drawing-room door opened behind them. Sir Rhys Trevethan, 36, tall, 6 feet upright, lean, his soft, sandy brown hair just brushing his collar, his clear, honest, hazel eyes warm. His fair, lightly tanned, clean-shaven face quiet, in plain dark green country coat, buff waistcoat, buff breeches, brown-topped boots, white cravat, the small black silk mourning band likewise put off 3 days previous, came in at 5:00 with the faint cold smell of horse and saddle leather upon him, and stopped 2 paces inside the threshold at the sight of his brother-in-law at the hearth with his wife's hands in his. Cassia turned her head. Sir Rhys looked at her face, then at Damien. He did not require to be told. He crossed the rug in 3 steady strides. He held out his right hand. Damien took it. They held the grip, a long, quiet 5 seconds, in the Welsh manner of grave congratulation, without a word. And then Sir Rhys said, in his faint Welsh lilt, "Then we shall send for Mr. Stannard tomorrow morning, brother." "Tomorrow morning, Rhys." Mr. Stannard, 48, the Caversham family solicitor, tall, 6 feet upright thin, with the slight stoop of his scholar's profession. His thinning silver-grey hair carefully combed back, his steady grey eyes set behind small gold-rimmed spectacles, his fair indoor pallor faintly weathered by the 4-day post road, his long narrow scholar's face clean-shaven, in plain black superfine white cravat, black silk waistcoat, charcoal pantaloons, polished black shoes, his leather-bound client's ledger close beneath his left arm, was set down at the iron gates of Place Verne upon Tuesday the 4th of May, 1819. He heard the whole matter laid out in steady country quiet by Damien over the soup that night. He read the draft from the small black-lacquered cabinet and the original of the false letter, side by side, in the south drawing-room with a single candle at his elbow. He closed the ledger upon both papers. He set his thin, steady hands upon the cover, and he said only, "Your Grace, the matter shall be settled in 3 weeks." He left Plasseyburn upon the Thursday morning. He was at Lincoln's Inn by the following Tuesday. Upon Wednesday, the 12th of May, 1819, at 10 o'clock, a panel of 3 handwriting experts was convened in the small wood-panelled inner office of Messrs. Norton, Pinchbeck, and Crowley of Furnival's Inn. Mr. Norton Senior, handwriting expert to the Court of Chancery for 30 years, Mr. Pinchbeck, a younger expert specializing in the detection of forgery, his magnifying glass in his right hand, and Mr. Crowley, the firm's junior partner, sat as the panel's recording secretary with his quill at the inkstand. Mr. Stannard set both papers between them. The Lacey letter, shown to Damien on the morning of the 18th of June, 1812, lay at the left. The draft from the small black-lacquered cabinet at Brook Street lay at the right. The 3 examined the 2 papers for the better part of 3 hours. They compared the formation of the capital M, the downstroke of the long S in Lacey, the small particular hook of the late Lady Olympia's lower case G, the slope of the writing, the press of the nib, the ink. They held the 2 papers against the window, in the cold blue London May light, and flat upon the green leather. At 1 o'clock, Mr. Norton Senior took off his spectacles and dictated to Mr. Crowley the joint deposition that the paper at the right was a draft in the hand of the late Lady Olympia Sinclair of Brook Street, Mayfair. That the paper at the left was the fair copy executed from that draft, in the same hand, on the same paper stock, from the same Mayfair stationers, with the same ink. That the paper at the left was, in plain English, a forgery, and that no other hand had touched either document. The 3 set their names to it. Mr. Stannard took it that afternoon to the Lord Chancellor's office at Lincoln's Inn, where a copy was placed upon the public file. Upon Friday, the 28th of May, 1819, the following short notice appeared in the society columns of the Morning Chronicle, set at the foot of the 3rd column under a small plain rule. It is with regret that the publishers acknowledge an error of long standing in the society columns of June, 1812. The engagement of His Grace, the present Duke of Caversham, then Marquis, to Lady Marina Lockwood, only daughter of the late 10th Earl of Lockwood, broken off on the morning of the 18th of June, 1812, on the strength of a letter at that date supposed to be from Lady Marina to a Captain James Lacey of His Majesty's Foot Guards, has been formally established by depositions placed with this paper and with the Lord Chancellor's office at Lincoln's Inn, to have been founded upon a forgery in the hand of a now-deceased third party. The engagement is held by both principals to have stood throughout. The marriage is to take place in the Welsh parish of Llanforthwen, Cardiganshire, in the early autumn of the present year. The notice was read at 600 breakfast tables in Mayfair that morning. In the first week of June, 1819, Marina went up to London with Cassia in the Plasseyburn travelling coach for the 2 months of the late season. She stayed at the Trevethan townhouse in Berkeley Square. She wore by day plain pale blue silk morning gowns of soft Spitalfields make, the white lawn fichu still at the throat, plain ivory silk slippers, her late mother's small pearl drop earrings, and in the evening plain dark green silk dinner gowns of the same quiet cut, no flounce, no ornament, the small, thin, gold mourning band still upon the third finger of her left hand. Cassia presided at the small Berkeley Square dinners. Cerise came up from Place Yvern for a fortnight in mid-June. Damien remained at Caversham Park in Berkshire, setting the great house in order against its new mistress, and did not show himself in town the whole 2 months. Marina walked with Cassia each fair morning in the Green Park. She sat with her in the small front drawing-room each afternoon. She read aloud each evening from Cassia's small library. She did not go to the theatre. She did not go to the opera. She went once with Cassia to the Royal Academy upon a Tuesday morning at the hour of opening, and saw no one. The 2 months passed in the steady, composed quiet which had marked her 4.5 years. In the first week of August, 1819, the 3 calls came that Cassia had quietly arranged. Lady Sefton came upon the 3rd of August, a Tuesday morning at 11:30. Lady Jersey came upon the 5th, a Thursday at noon. Her Grace the Duchess of Devonshire came upon the 7th, a Saturday at 12:30. Each was received in the small front drawing-room. Each was presented by Cassia, who sat at her tambour frame at the south window through the call. Each was received by Marina in plain pale blue silk morning gown, her late mother's small pearl drop earrings, the small thin gold mourning band upon the third finger of her left hand, and at her throat, for the first time in her life, the Caversham diamonds, a single short 3-strand necklace of small, fine, well-matched stones, an old gift of Damien's late mother to her son for his marriage, sent down from Caversham Park to Berkeley Square in a small black leather case by Damien's private servant upon the 2nd of August. Marina received each of the 3 ladies seated upright in the right-hand pale blue silk-upholstered chair at the small mahogany tea-table, her clear, cool, sea-blue eyes very steady, her soft, warm, low alto with its faint Welsh lilt set in the steady, composed quiet of these 4.5 years. She rose for none, and curtsied to none save the Duchess of Devonshire, to whom she made a quiet half-curtsy of 1/4 inch as her rank required. She offered each tea from the small silver pot. She answered the small civil questions of London society in plain, steady sentences. She did not explain. She did not apologize. She did not name the late Lady Olympia Sinclair. She held her late mother's gold mourning band in plain view, and let the Caversham diamonds speak for the rest. Each of the 3 ladies departed in steady satisfaction. Lady Sefton wrote Cassia a brief note that evening upon her plain cream paper, sealed with the small Sefton crest. "My dear Treverton, she will do beautifully. Bring her to Almack's in the autumn season after the wedding. Caversham has been forgiven by his aunt, I trust, in the next world." Cassia laid the note upon the small mahogany breakfast table the next morning, beside the chocolate pot, smiled once, and burnt it in the small grate. Upon Friday the 13th of August, 1819, at 7 o'clock, the Place Yvern travelling coach was drawn up at the curb of Berkeley Square. Marina, Cassia, and Cerise took their places. The trunks were strapped behind, and the 4-day journey back to Cardiganshire was begun. They reached Place Yvern at 6 o'clock upon the evening of Monday the 16th. Damien had been at Caversham Park since mid-July, preparing the great house for its new mistress, opening the long-shut south wing, having the small bridal chamber set fresh, having the Caversham roses cut in the south kitchen garden. He set out from Caversham at 4 o'clock upon the cold, pale blue Saturday morning of the 14th of August, took the slow road, and arrived at the iron gates of Place Yvern at 5:30 upon the warm, pale yellow afternoon of Tuesday the 17th. The first of the 3 Sundays came on the 22nd of August. The small Norman parish church of St. Lordog the Martyr above the cold blue Cardiganshire Bay was filled to the doors with the village of Llanforth Wen, the household of Place Yvern, and the small party of visitors from Caversham. The Reverend Price, 53, his soft, sandy grey hair finely thinning at the crown, his clear, honest hazel eyes set behind small gold-rimmed spectacles, his fair, gently weathered skin, his long, kind, clean-shaven face, medium 5'10" with thin, slight stoop, in black cassock with white linen surplice, white collar band, small silver crucifix upon a black silk cord, his soft Welsh lilt steady, stood at the chancel step at the close of the morning service. The parish women had brought, that first Sunday, small bunches of pale yellow, wild scabious and dark blue speedwell from the cliffside. They were set upon the chancel step in 2 small white earthen jugs. The Reverend Price read in his quiet country voice, "I publish the banns of marriage between Damien Alexander Sinclair, 6th Duke of Caversham Park in the county of Berkshire, and Lady Marina Lockwood, of this parish of Llanforthwen. This is for the first time of asking. If any of you know cause or just impediment why these 2 persons should not be joined together in holy matrimony, ye are to declare it." The small Norman church was wholly still. None was offered. The second Sunday came on the 29th of August. White spring narcissus cut from the rectory garden by Mrs. Price had joined the small bunches of scabious and speedwell. The Reverend Price read again, for the second time of asking. None was offered. The third Sunday came on the 5th of September. The Plasy Wern hothouse roses, cut by Sir Rees himself, had now joined the cliff flowers and the rectory narcissus in 3 small white earthen jugs. The Reverend Price read, for the third time of asking. None was offered. The cold, pale blue Cardiganshire September dusk was gathering over the bay upon the Friday evening of the 10th of September, 1819. The small south parlour at the rectory had been cleared for the wedding gown, the high-waisted ivory silk wedding gown, taken out at last from the Sinclair travelling trunk, the same plain country cut Marina had quietly approved with Cassia and Mrs. Price in late August, was laid out at full length upon the parlour table beneath a length of fine white linen. Mrs. Owen sat at the small work table at the leaded window with the rectory sewing box open upon her knee, stitching the last small alteration at the right cuff. Mrs. Price, 49, soft mid-brown hair pinned beneath a small white lace cap, clear hazel eyes warm with the long summer's quiet, plump and kind in plain dark blue print cotton with white linen apron and fichu stood at her shoulder. Megan, 12, and Anwen, 10, both in plain pale pink cotton schoolgirls' gowns with white pinafores, their soft mid-brown hair in 2 long and 2 short plaits, sat upon the small turkey rug at Marina's feet with their hands folded in their laps. Cassia in plain high-waisted, soft, pale blue silk evening gown with white lace fichu, the small black jet brooch put off at last, her dark mahogany brown chignon smooth beneath a small white lace evening cap, stood at the leaded window with a small china cup of tea between her hands, and looked out over the cold pale blue bay in steady composed Sinclair quiet. The Reverend Price, in his small study across the narrow flagged hall, sat at his small oak writing desk with the parish prayer book open before him, and read the marriage service over once, half aloud in his quiet Welsh lilt, for the morning. Marina sat in the right-hand ox-blood leather armchair beside the small hearth in plain pale blue wool morning gown with white lawn fichu, the small thin gold mourning band upon the third finger of her left hand, her clear, cool, sea-blue eyes very steady upon the cold, pale blue September dusk gathering quietly over the long Cardiganshire Bay. The warm, pale yellow Saturday morning of the 11th of September, 1819, broke clear and still above the cold blue Cardiganshire Bay, and at 8:30, the small north chamber over the rectory kitchen at Llanforthwen stood already 2 hours awake. Marina had risen at 6. She had bathed in the small pewter tub set before the clean grate. She had drawn on, over the plain white linen shift, the high-waisted ivory silk wedding gown which had hung 4.5 years unworn in the small wardrobe of that chamber. The gown her late aunt Eulalia Brassington had pressed and folded into a cedarwood chest at Bath in 1812. The gown which had travelled with Marina to Llanforthwen in early 1814. The gown which had lain through 4 winters of plain, dark charcoal grey wool. Cassia had had Plassivern's quiet seamstress, in the first week of September, let it out a half-inch at the bodice and no more. Otherwise it fit her exactly as it had been made for her 18-year-old self at 25 to 10 on the 18th of June, 1812. The Lady Cassia Trevethan, née Sinclair, 30, sister of the bridegroom, in a plain pale cream silk morning gown with white lace fichu, the lavender half-mourning for her late aunt, put off at first light, her dark mahogany-brown wavy hair pinned smooth in a low chignon under a small white lace cap. Her clear, cool, grey-green eyes, very steady, had come down by the cliff path from Plassivern at 7:15, with the Trevethan lady's maid behind her. The maid had been called only to assist. The final pinning Cassia had reserved for her own hands. She set Marina before the oval looking-glass, drew the long, rich, dark chestnut wavy hair through her own steady fingers, brushed it out smooth, and pinned it into a low chignon at the nape. 2 small wisps loosened at the temples. Onto the chignon she pinned the small coronet of white spring narcissus the Price daughters had woven the evening before. Onto the coronet she pinned the heirloom Sinclair 1781 wedding veil, fine cream Brussels lace, the bridegroom's grandmother and his late mother had worn, that Cassia herself had worn at her wedding in 1810, and laid it back over Marina's shoulders, without bringing it forward over her face. Marina was 24, ivory-fair English skin, with a faint warm rose flush across the cheekbones, and faint freckles across the bridge of the nose, a small natural beauty mark just above the left corner of her lower lip, finely arched, dark honey-brown brows, an oval face, a soft, well-shaped mouth at composed quiet, a long, graceful neck, and clear, cool sea-blue eyes, true sea-blue, the colour of the Irish sea under cloud, thick dark lashes, a faint fleck of dark gold in them. She was slender, 5'5" upright. She wore long, plain ivory silk gloves to the elbow. At her throat the Caversham diamonds, small antique seed pearls and brilliants in a graduated necklace, fetched out of the strong room at Caversham Park and carried by Mr. Tarrant himself to Plassivern in the last week of August, lay smooth and cool. At her ears were her late mother's small pearl-drop earrings. Upon the smallest finger of her right hand she had kept her late mother's small, thin gold mourning band, transferred from her left hand to her right at her Aunt Eulalia's funeral in late 1813, and kept on the right since. Cassia set both hands lightly upon Marina's shoulders. "Sister, he has waited 7 years and 3 months. He will wait 7 more minutes while you breathe." Marina drew one breath, drew a second, inclined her chin. "Thank you, Cassia," she said, in her soft, warm, low alto with its faintest trace of acquired Welsh. Mrs. Owen, 60, the rectory housekeeper, iron grey hair pinned beneath her best small white linen cap, clear hazel kind eyes brimming and held, in her best plain black silk Sunday gown with white linen apron, stood at the chamber door with the bride's small posy of narcissus, myrtle, and speedwell, tied with white silk ribbon. "Miss Lady," the church bell at 9:30, she said only, and went down the stair. At 25 to 10, the same hour of the same minute at which the Marquis's note had reached her 7 years and 3 months earlier in Welbeck Street, a parallel neither she nor Damien had remarked aloud, but which both had noticed in the days preceding. The rectory door opened, and Sir Rhys Trevethan, 36 of Plassy-Verne, husband to Cassia these 9 years, stood upon the worn flagstone step, with his hat in his left hand and his right arm a quarter bent in offer. Tall, 6 feet, lean, clean-shaven, fair, lightly tanned, soft, sandy brown hair just brushing his collar. Clear, honest, hazel eyes very steady. He wore a black, superfine morning coat, a white silk waistcoat, buff pantaloons, polished black evening shoes, white cravat, and at the lapel a small sprig of white spring narcissus to match the bride's coronet. He inclined a half bow. "Lady Marina." Marina laid her gloved hand upon his black sleeve. The veil fell back behind her shoulders. Mrs. Owen and Cassia followed 2 paces behind. The cliff path rose softly through warm September turf, and low sea pinks in their last bloom. The Irish Sea lay flat and blue upon the right hand. The low square Norman tower of the small 12th century Welsh parish chapel of St. Lordog the Martyr stood whitewashed against the long horizon, a quarter of a mile ahead. They walked it in the quiet of soft turf, and one steady arm offered, and one steady gloved hand laid upon it, and the path bent at last, and the south porch came into view, and the village and the 3 Caversham travelling carriages at the lych gate lay below them in warm, pale yellow light. The chapel had stood 700 years above the cold blue bay. Its walls were pale Cardiganshire stone, weathered to a soft sand-grey by 7 centuries of salt and rain. Its square Norman tower was whitewashed and plain. Its narrow lancet windows admitted the warm, pale yellow September light in long, slow shafts down the south aisle and across the plain oak pews polished by 7 centuries of country Sundays. At every pew end, a small posy of narcissus, myrtle, and speedwell, tied with white silk ribbon, had been set by the Price daughters and Bethan Probert the evening before. Upon the simple oak altar, 2 tall brass candlesticks bore 2 lit beeswax candles, their flames upright in the still air. The pews were filled to the doors, the household of Caversham Park in the south aisle behind Mr. Terrent, the household and tenants of Plassy-Verne in the north aisle, and the whole village of Llanforthwen between, in their best Sunday black and dark blue. At the altar stood the Reverend Price, 53, soft sandy grey hair finely thinning at the crown, clear honest hazel eyes steady behind small gold-rimmed spectacles, long kind clean-shaven face, medium 5'10" with a thin slight stoop, in his black cassock with newly pressed white linen surplice, white collar band, small silver crucifix on its black silk cord. He had said the marriage service 41 times in his 30 years at Llanforthwen, and he held this one in his steady hands, as he had held the first. At the chancel step stood Damien Alexander Sinclair, 6th Duke of Caversham, 35, his thick, deep mahogany brown wavy hair brushing his coat collar, the one premature streak of pure silver above his left temple plain in the warm light, the one lock fallen across his brow, his clear, cool, grey-green eyes, the colour of a winter Welsh sea under cloud, set quietly upon the west door. His fair, faintly weathered skin was clean-shaven, the small, thin, pale scar at his right temple from the 1814 fall at Caversham was a finger's breadth above his cheekbone. His face was strong and angular, his nose straight and Roman, his mouth firm and grave, the small dark mole at the left corner of his lower lip distinct against the fair skin. He stood tall, 6'2", lean and broad-shouldered, in a black superfine wedding tailcoat, high white-starched cravat, white silk waistcoat with very faint silver pinstripe, black satin knee breeches, white silk stockings, buckled black evening shoes. Upon his right hand, He wore the Caversham ducal signet, heavy silver, a stag's head over a sheaf of barley. Upon the smallest finger of his left, his late father's small mourning ring, a thin gold band with a single jet stone kept on. At his lapel was a single sprig of white spring narcissus. The small black crepe mourning band for his late aunt had come off 3 days before. The west door opened upon the warm, pale yellow light, and the congregation rose. Sir Rhys led Marina up the short aisle. Cassia, matron of honour, came 2 paces behind her. White lace fichu at her throat, where the black jet brooch of half-mourning had been put off, a small string of pearls in its place, her plain gold wedding band of 9 years upon her left hand, her pearl drop earrings catching the lancet window light, her clear, cool, grey-green eyes very steady upon her brother. Damien saw Marina, and his firm, grave mouth softened a 1/4 inch and no more, and his eyes held upon hers with the considering, steady gaze of a man who had asked one question and heard one answer, and spent 11 months waiting upon it. Sir Rhys laid Marina's gloved hand upon Damien's gloved hand at the chancel step. Sir Rhys stepped a half-pace back. Cassia took her place at Marina's left shoulder. The Reverend Price, in his soft Welsh lilt held quietly steady, opened the service in the proper form. He read the exhortation. He read the charge that if any man knew cause why they might not lawfully be joined together, he should now declare it. The chapel was silent. He spoke to Damien. Damien Alexander Sinclair, 6th Duke of Caversham, wilt thou have this woman to thy wedded wife, to live together after God's ordinance in the holy estate of matrimony? Wilt thou love her, comfort her, honour and keep her in sickness and in health, and, forsaking all other, keep thee only unto her, so long as ye both shall live? Damien, in his deep, clear, quiet baritone, the 4 words steady, I will. The Reverend Price spoke to Marina. Marina Lockwood, wilt thou have this man to thy wedded husband, to live together after God's ordinance in the holy estate of matrimony? Wilt thou obey him, and serve him, love, honour, and keep him in sickness and in health, and, forsaking all other, keep thee only unto him, so long as ye both shall live? Marina, in her soft, warm, low alto with its faintest trace of acquired Welsh, the 4 words steady, I will. Sir Rhys gave Marina to Damien to be married. Damien took her right hand in his, and said after the Reverend Price the words of the man's vow, to have and to hold, from this day forward, for better for worse, for richer for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death us do part, and thereto he plighted her his troth. They loosed hands. Marina took Damien's right hand in hers, and said after him the words of the woman's vow, to have and to hold, from this day forward, for better for worse, for richer for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love, cherish, and to obey, till death us do part, and thereto she gave him her troth. The ring was given to the Reverend Price upon the prayer book, the plain gold Caversham wedding band cut for her in May 1812 and kept since the 18th of June of that year in the same drawer of Damien's writing desk in Berkeley Square, in which it had lain unworn ever after, and which Mr. Tarrant had carried by his own hand into Cardiganshire in the last week of August. Damien set it upon the 4th finger of Marina's gloved left hand. With this ring I thee wed, with my body I thee honour, and with all my worldly goods I thee endow. The plain gold band sat against the long ivory silk glove, and Marina looked once at it, and her clear, cool, sea-blue eyes lifted to her husband's. The Reverend Price joined their right hands, and spoke in his soft Welsh lilt. Those whom God hath joined together, let no man put asunder. He pronounced them man and wife. He spoke the blessing. The lancet window light came warm and pale yellow down the south aisle. The wedding breakfast lay at Place Yverne. The long mahogany table in the south dining parlour was dressed in white Irish linen, with small posies of narcissus, myrtle, and speedwell tied in white silk ribbon set at intervals down its length. At the centre stood Place Yverne's cook's wedding cake, a plain English fruit cake under pale cream royal icing, a sprig of white spring narcissus set upon its top. Damien and Marina sat at the head, Cassia at Marina's right, Cerise at Damien's left. Mr. Tarrant, 62, thinning silver-grey hair brushed back, pale blue eyes finely lined, long, kind, clean-shaven face, tall, 6 feet thin upright, in his plain black butler's tailcoat, the small black mourning band put off, had come down from Caversham Park in the last week of August, and stood the long ceremony of it at the sideboard with 2 Place Yverne footmen behind him. The Reverend Price, Mrs. Price in her best dark blue silk, Megan in her best pale blue cotton with new white pinafore, Anwen in her best pale pink cotton with new white pinafore, sat in the household line. Mrs. Owen, in the best black silk she had not worn in 9 years, sat at Mrs. Price's right. Cerise stood at his place. He had no London speech in him. He gave the country toast in his quiet, Welsh-edged voice. To the bride and the bridegroom, long life, fair weather, and the patient, steady years. The table rose. The table drank. Cassia rose. She did not weep. She had wept the evening of the 13th of April. There is a grace given to the sister of a brother, who has come at last to the door he had thought closed. I give it now, to Marina, who is sister to me from this morning, and to Damien, who is brother to me by long standing. Every blessing this house and Caversham Park and the patient steady years can give. The table rose again. The table drank again. Marina set her gloved hand upon Cassia's, on the white Irish linen, and held it there a moment. The cake was cut by the bride's gloved hand upon the bridegroom's. The first slice went to the Reverend Price, the second to Mrs. Owen, the third to Mr. Tarrant, then to Megan and Anwen, and the 6th to Bethan Probert, who had come up in her best dark blue print cotton gown with white linen pinafore, her soft pale blonde hair in a single plait, her clear pale blue eyes very wide. She made her small country curtsy and ate her slice standing against the south wall. At noon, Damien rose from his place and offered Marina his right arm, and they went out together through the south door of Place Yverne and onto the cliff path that rose softly above the cold blue bay. Cassia stood in the porch, one hand upon the warm stone of the door jamb. Cerise came a half-pace behind her and laid his right hand upon her shoulder. Mrs. Owen had walked back to the rectory and stood now at its door looking up at them, hands folded before her in her best black silk. They walked the cliff path slowly. Neither spoke at first. The Irish sea lay blue and very flat upon their right hand. Small sea pinks bloomed against the warm September turf. A gull turned over the bay and went seaward. Marina laid her left hand, the gloved hand with the plain gold Caversham wedding band, over Damien's right forearm where her right hand was already settled, so that both rested upon his sleeve. He looked down at her once. His firm, grave mouth softened a 1/4 inch and held there. "Marina," he said, in his deep, clear, quiet baritone. "Damien," she said, in her soft, warm, low alto. They walked on under the warm, pale yellow September light above the cold blue Cardiganshire Bay, and the small chapel of St. Lordog the Martyr stood plain and white against the long horizon behind them, and Cassia in the porch watched them go and did not call after them. The warm gold autumn Friday evening of the 27th of October, 1820, came down at 8:30 upon Caversham Park in Berkshire. The South Library was dim and warm and quiet. A small, steady fire of seasoned beech burned low upon the marble hearth. The single trimmed lamp upon the long, polished walnut writing table cast a soft pool of yellow light. The high oak shelves rose into soft brown gloom. The two faded crimson leather wing chairs, drawn close to the hearth, stood at their accustomed quarter turn toward each other. In her usual right-hand wing chair sat the 6th Duchess of Caversham, Marina, now Lady Damien Sinclair, 26, in a plain, high-waisted, soft, warm amber silk evening gown with long sleeves and white lace fichu. The Caversham diamonds lay at her throat, the plain gold Caversham wedding band upon the 4th finger of her left hand, her late mother's small, thin gold mourning band upon the smallest finger of her right, her mother's pearl drop earrings catching the firelight. Her long, rich, dark chestnut wavy hair was pinned smooth in a low chignon at the nape, with small wisps escaped at the temples. Copper lights showed in them where the fire reached. Her clear, cool, sea-blue eyes were lowered to a small cloth-bound Persuasion open upon her lap. She was reading aloud, in her soft, warm, low alto, the chapter at Lyme. In the wing chair opposite, his late father's chair, sat Damien Alexander Sinclair, 6th Duke of Caversham, 36, in a black superfine evening tailcoat, white cravat, white silk waistcoat, charcoal pantaloons, polished black Hessian boots. His clear, cool grey-green eyes upon her over the small cloth-bound book, his thick, deep mahogany brown wavy hair falling at the brow in its one familiar lock, the premature streak of pure silver above his left temple plain in the lamplight. His firm grave mouth softened a quarter inch, the Caversham ducal signet upon his right hand, his late father's small mourning ring upon the smallest finger of his left. He did not speak. He listened. In the small nursery in the east wing, beyond the long polished corridor of family portraits, their son the Marquis of Caversham, 6 months old, dark mahogany hair at the crown and sea-blue eyes closing, was asleep in his nurse's arms. There are stories that begin with a kiss. There are stories that begin with a vow. There are stories that begin with a knock, and stories that begin with a hired post-chaise, and stories that begin with a Tacitus on a stone bench, and stories that begin with a tortoise-shell cat asleep upon an embroidered cushion, and stories that begin with a brush dragging on a cold flagstone, and stories that begin with a letter read aloud in a bath-upper room, and stories that begin with a young widow standing at the foot of her late husband's stair. And there are, rarer, longer in the carrying, of the most patient and most painful steadiness in the answering, stories that begin with a single folded sheet of cream, laid paper sealed with a Caversham ducal crest, handed into the hand of an 18-year-old bride in her high-waisted ivory silk wedding gown at 25 to 10 of the morning of the 18th of June, 1812, at her godfather's house in Welbeck Street, Mayfair. 2¼ hours before the wedding, she had believed she would be making, by a footman in Caversham livery who had ridden from Berkeley Square, and a marquis at his townhouse in Berkeley Square that same hour, who had set his name to the brief cold note on the strength of a forgery laid before him by his late aunt, and 6 years and 4 months of silence between them, and a Welsh village in Cardiganshire above the cold Irish Sea, and a small black-lacquered writing cabinet opened at 3:30 on the cold, pale blue Wednesday afternoon of the 30th of September, 1818, in the South Library at Caversham Park in Berkshire, and the recognition, at last, of his aunt's hand. And so, on the warm, pale yellow Saturday morning of the 11th of September, 1819, in the small Welsh parish chapel of St. Lordog, the martyr above the cold blue Cardiganshire Bay, Lady Marina Lockwood, who had stood in her wedding gown at 5:20 to 10 on the 18th of June, 1812, and read in steady silence the brief cold note in her bridegroom's own hand that broke their engagement 2¼ hours before the ceremony, and had not wept then, and had not wept in the 7 years and 3 months following, became, by the patient, steady asking of the man who had spent 6 years carrying alone a misunderstanding that was wholly his late aunt's making, and the 4 months following its discovery riding to Wales to find her and to lay before her at her own teaching, pianoforte in a small rectory parlour, the draft of the forgery he had been shown, the 6th Duchess of Caversham, and the bride that summer of 1812 had been denied her.